Hundred Years' War was not a single continuous conflict, but a long and bitter struggle that stretched from 1337 to 1453, reshaping the destiny of England and France. It was a war born from disputed crowns, wounded pride, and shifting loyalties, fought across generations where fathers began battles their grandsons would finish. At its heart were a series of decisive battles, moments when the fate of kingdoms seemed to hang on muddy fields, narrow bridges, and fortified towns. The first great turning point came in 1346 at the Battle of Crécy. King Edward III of England had landed in Normandy with an army far smaller than that of the French king, Philip VI. The French relied on traditional medieval warfare, armoured knights charging on horseback, supported by mercenaries. The English, however, brought a revolutionary weapon, the longbow. On a sloping hillside near Crécy, English archers rained arrows with devastating speed and power. French cavalry charges broke again and again under the storm of arrows, their heavy armour and disorder working against them. By nightfall, thousands of French nobles lay dead, while English losses were minimal. Crécy shattered the myth of French knightly invincibility and announced a new age of warfare. A decade later, in 1356, the Battle of Poitiers deepened the French catastrophe. Edward, the Black Prince, son of Edward III, found himself pursued by a much larger French army led by King John II. Once again, the English chose their ground carefully, using hedges and terrain to funnel the enemy. When the French attacked, they were met by disciplined archers and sudden counterattacks by English men-at-arms. The result was astonishing. King John II was captured on the battlefield, a reigning French king taken prisoner, humiliated before Europe. France plunged into political chaos, while England gained enormous leverage through ransom and prestige. Yet the war did not remain one-sided forever. By the early 15th century, England, under King Henry V, sought to revive its fading claims. This ambition led to the most famous battle of the war, Agincourt in 1415. After a brutal march through northern France, Henry's exhausted army was cornered by a vastly superior French force. The battlefield was a narrow strip of muddy land between two woods. When the French advanced, their heavy armour sank into the mud. English longbowmen, positioned behind sharpened stakes, unleashed relentless volleys. The French ranks collapsed into confusion and suffocation. Against all odds, the English achieved a crushing victory. Agincourt became legend, a symbol of courage, discipline, and tactical brilliance against overwhelming numbers. Despite these English triumphs, the tide would eventually turn. The early 15th century saw France near collapse, its lands divided, and its morale shattered. Then, in 1429, history took a dramatic and unexpected turn with the Siege of Orléans. Orléans was the last major stronghold preventing English domination of France. Into this desperate situation stepped Joan of Arc, a teenage peasant girl claiming divine guidance. Against skepticism and ridicule, she inspired French troops with renewed confidence and purpose. Under her symbolic leadership, French forces broke the English siege. Though Joan was not a military commander in the modern sense, her presence transformed the spirit of the French army. Orléans marked the psychological turning point of the war. Following Orléans, the French gained momentum. Victories such as Poitiers, later in 1429, demonstrated that English armies could be defeated decisively in open battle. At Poitiers, French cavalry overran English archers before they could properly deploy, reversing the pattern that had dominated earlier decades. The myth of English battlefield superiority was broken. As the war dragged on, technology and strategy evolved. One of the final decisive moments came in 1450 at the Battle of Formigny. Here, the French effectively used artillery, cannons that disrupted English formations and signalled the rise of gunpowder warfare. English forces in Normandy were crushed, and their long-held territories began to fall rapidly. The last great battle, and the true end of the war, arrived in 1453 at the Battle of Castillon. The English attempted to relieve a besieged garrison in southwestern France, but walked into a carefully prepared French artillery position. Cannons devastated the English troops, and their commander, John Talbot, was killed. It was a decisive and final blow. England lost almost all its French possessions, retaining only Calais for a few more years. The 100 Years' War ended not with a treaty, but with exhaustion and irreversible change. England emerged more unified internally, but turned its ambitions away from France. France, forged in suffering, emerged as a stronger, more centralised kingdom, with a growing sense of national identity. The age of feudal knights gave way to professional armies, gunpowder weapons, and modern warfare. From Crécy to Castillon, the greatest battles of the 100 Years' War tell a story not just of bloodshed, but of transformation, of how courage, innovation, leadership, and belief reshaped the medieval world and laid the foundations of modern Europe. Now close your eyes and let the weight of the present day dissolve into the mist. Imagine you were standing in a vast stone hall, the air cool and smelling faintly of dried lavender and old parchment. The light here is dim, filtered through tall, narrow windows that turn the afternoon sun into shafts of dusty gold. You can hear the soft scratch of a quill against vellum, a sound that has recorded the rise and fall of kings for centuries. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. We must drift back now, not to the clash of swords, but to the silence before the storm. It is 1328, and the Kingdom of France is holding its breath. The Capetian dynasty, which has ruled France for over 300 years in an unbroken line from father to son, has suddenly run out of sons. King Charles IV, known as Charles the Fair, has died, leaving behind a pregnant queen. But when the child is born, it is a girl. The direct male line is extinguished. It is a crisis that feels less like politics and more like a curse, leaving the throne empty and the courtiers whispering in the shadowed corners of the Louvre. Across the narrow sea in England, a young King Edward III watches with keen interest. He is the nephew of the late French king. His mother is a French princess, and by blood he has the strongest claim to the throne. But the French nobles, terrified of being ruled by an Englishman, dust off an ancient legal code known as Salic law, a rule so old and obscure that historians still debate whether they found it or simply invented it on the spot to suit their needs. This law, they claim, forbids the crown from passing through a woman. It is a convenient bit of legal gymnastics, rather like changing the rules of a board game just because you are losing. Instead of Edward, they choose Philip of Valois, a cousin, to be King Philip VI. For a time, it seems peace might hold. In 1329, inside the magnificent cathedral of Amiens, young Edward III kneels before Philip VI to pay homage for his lands in Aquitaine. Imagine the scene. The velvet robes of crimson and blue, the heavy gold chains, the stained glass casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the stone floor. Edward kneels, but he does not remove his crown, and his hands do not fully clasp Philip's. It is a gesture of submission, yes, but it is hollow, filled with the simmering resentment of a young man who believes the crown on the other man's head belongs to him. The friction between them is not just about titles, it is about wool and wine. The wealthy merchants of Flanders, who buy English wool to weave into fine cloth, are being squeezed by the French king, while the English lands in Gascony are constantly threatened. It is a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark finally comes in 1337. Philip VI, tired of Edward's arrogance, declares that the English Duchy of Aquitaine is forfeited to the French crown. It is a diplomatic slap in the face. Edward's response is not to apologise, but to escalate. He formally challenges Philip, declaring himself the true King of France. The letter of defiance is sent, the seals are broken, and the long peace of the Middle Ages is shattered. There are no cannons yet, only the creak of wagon wheels and the sharpening of iron as two nations, bound by blood and separated by water, begin the slow, inexorable march toward a century of war. The war has officially begun, yet for the first few years it is a conflict of words and shadows, of raids and burned villages, but no great collision of armies. The English Channel, that turbulent strip of grey water separating the island from the continent, becomes the true frontier. To invade France, Edward III needs the sea, but the sea is currently locked behind a wall of floating oak. It is June 1340, 3 years into the war, and the French king Philip VI has assembled a massive fleet to blockade the English coast. They are gathered at the estuary of the Twin, an inlet leading to the bustling merchant city of Bruges, near the town of Sluys. It is not merely a fleet, it is a floating city, a great army of the sea, comprising over 200 vessels, including massive Genoese galleys and commandeered merchant cogs. When Edward III sails from the Orwell estuary in Suffolk, he is warned by his advisers not to go. They tell him the French fleet is a dragon waiting to devour him, but Edward, with the stubbornness that defines his lineage, replies that he will cross or he will never cross again. As the English fleet approaches the coast of Flanders on the afternoon of June 23rd, the sight that greets them is breathtaking and terrifying. Contemporary chroniclers describe the French masts as a forest growing from the sea, so dense that the water itself seems to have disappeared beneath the wood. The French admirals, Hugues Quiéret and Nicolas Béhuchet, have made a tactical decision that historians still debate with perplexed fascination. Rather than using their superior numbers to swarm the English in the open water, they have chosen to chain their ships together side by side, creating a colossal, immovable barricade across the mouth of the harbour. Perhaps they intended to create an impregnable wooden fortress, a castle on the waves, but in doing so, they have sacrificed the one thing a ship needs most: movement. They have turned a naval battle into a land battle fought on heaving decks. Edward, observing this static wall of timber from his flagship, the Thomas, does not attack immediately. He displays a patience that belies his reputation for rashness. He waits for the tide to turn and for the sun to lower. He wants the wind behind his sails and the setting sun in the eyes of his enemies. It is a moment of eerie calm. The only sound the lapping of waves against the hull and the creaking of rigging, as thousands of men check their weapons and whisper prayers to the salt spray air. Finally, in the late afternoon, the tide shifts. The English fleet manoeuvres, the wind filling their sails, driving them down onto the anchored French line with the force of a falling hammer. The battle that follows is less a display of sailing and more a brutal, claustrophobic scrum. The English ships crash into the French line with a sickening crunch of timber, grappling hooks flying through the air to bind the vessels together. It is a chaotic dance of wood and iron. The English strategy relies heavily on the longbowmen who are stationed on the high forecastles of the ships. From these wooden towers they unleash a relentless storm of arrows down onto the crowded decks of the French vessels. Because the French ships are chained together, the soldiers on board have nowhere to run, nowhere to manoeuvre. They are trapped in a cage of their own making. The Genoese crossbowmen, hired by the French, try to return fire, but their weapons are slow to reload, and the setting sun is blinding them, turning the English ships into silhouettes against a burning sky. It is said that the arrows flew so thick they looked like a winter hail, a terrifying weather phenomenon made of ash and iron. Slowly Methodically, the English men-at-arms board the French ships, crossing the gunwales sword in hand to clear the decks. The fighting is fierce, a grinding struggle for every inch of planking. Among the French fleet is the Christopher, a massive English ship that had been captured by the French years earlier. Seeing their own lost ship in enemy hands fills the English with a cold fury, and when they finally retake her, a cheer goes up that is reportedly heard for miles along the Flemish coast. It is a strange sort of warfare where knights accustomed to the solid earth find themselves slipping on wet decks, discovering that heavy plate armour is a distinct disadvantage when one misses a step and falls into the deep. Buoyancy, alas, was not included in the code of chivalry. By nightfall, the wooden wall has been dismantled. The French fleet is not just defeated, it is annihilated. Almost all of the ships are captured or sunk, and the 2 French admirals are killed. The English victory is so complete, so overwhelming, that for days afterward, the locals claim the fish in the harbour are drunk on French blood. It is a grim image, but it speaks to the magnitude of the disaster for France. King Philip VI is not at the battle, he is waiting inland for news. The burden of delivering the catastrophic report falls to the court jester, a man whose job allows him to speak truths that would cost others their heads. The jester approaches the king and begins to complain loudly about the cowardice of the English. "Why are they cowards?" the king asks, puzzled. "Because," the jester replies with a sad, knowing smile, "they did not have the courage to jump into the sea like our brave Frenchmen did." It is a dark punchline to a tragedy. Sluys changes everything. It gives England command of the Channel, ensuring that the war will be fought on French soil, not English. The invasion can proceed. The forest of masts has been felled, and the path to the continent is open. Yet, as the English celebrate and the wreckage washes ashore, a new realization begins to dawn on both sides. This war will not be decided by knights alone. At Sluys, it was the archers on the forecastles who cleared the way. A humble weapon, made of yew and string, is beginning to cast a very long shadow over the glittering armour of the aristocracy. The age of the longbow has arrived, and it is about to demand its place in history. Before we follow King Edward deeper into the French countryside, we must pause. We must step away from the grand strategies of kings and the tossing decks of ships to examine a simple piece of wood that is about to dismantle the feudal order, the English longbow. To the uninitiated, it looks like nothing more than a bent stick. It lacks the mechanical complexity of the crossbow or the elegant curvature of the composite bows used by Eastern horsemen. It is, in essence, a 6-foot stave of yew, a tree often found in churchyards, associated with death and ancient silence. But in the hands of a trained yeoman, this stick is a terrifying engine of kinetic energy. The wood itself is a marvel of nature's engineering. The yew tree grows in such a way that the sapwood on the outside resists tension, stretching, while the heartwood on the inside resists compression. When the bow is drawn, these two forces work in perfect opposition, turning the bow into a natural spring of immense power. Pulling the string of a war bow is not a casual act. It requires a draw weight of anywhere from 100 to 180 pounds. Imagine lifting a full-grown man with 2 fingers. That is the strength required for every single shot. It is a strength that cannot be learned in a week or a month. It must be bred into the bone. This is why archery in England is not just a military tactic. It is a way of life, mandated by law. Every Sunday, after church, men and boys in every village are required to practice at the butts. Skeletal remains of English archers from this period show enlarged arm bones and spinal deformities, the physical toll of a lifetime spent warping the body to serve the weapon. They're not merely soldiers, they are living artillery. The arrow they loose is equally deadly, a cloth-yard shaft tipped with a bodkin point, a heavy, needle-like chisel, of hardened steel designed not to cut, but to punch. Against the chainmail and plate armour of the French nobility, these arrows are horrifyingly effective. A crossbow bolt hits with a single massive impact, but it takes a long time to reload. You must put your foot in a stirrup and crank a winch. In the time it takes a crossbowman to fire once, a skilled longbowman can loose 6, 10, perhaps 12 arrows. When thousands of archers fire at once, the effect is not like sniping. It is like a sudden, localized weather event. The sky darkens, a humming vibration fills the air, and then comes the sound, like the tearing of a giant sheet of canvas, as thousands of shafts strike home. For the French knights, bred on the ideals of chivalry, where combat is meant to be a noble, face-to-face contest between equals, this is an abomination. To be killed from a distance by a peasant you cannot even see, by a man whose entire annual income might not buy your horse's saddle, feels less like war and more like murder. It is a social revolution disguised as a projectile. Historians still debate the true armour-piercing capability of the longbow at long ranges. Some modern tests suggest that high-quality plate armour could deflect an arrow, glancing it off the curved steel. Yet, at Agincourt and Crécy, knights fell in droves. Perhaps the arrows found the weak points, the armpits, the visors, the groin. Or perhaps the sheer kinetic force of the impact was enough to knock a man backward, to bruise him through the steel, to terrify his horse. And that is the other secret of the longbow, the horse. A knight is a tank, but his mount is vulnerable. An arrow in the flank of a destrier turns a disciplined charge into a stampede of pain and panic. The longbow does not just kill men, it kills the cohesion of the cavalry charge, the very tactic that has dominated European warfare for centuries. But there is a myth here we must gently unravel. We often imagine the English army as a machine of perfect unity, but these archers are often criminals, outlaws, or desperate men seeking a pardon or a wage. They are the rough, rowdy commoners of England, promised sixpence a day, a decent wage, to walk hundreds of miles in bad boots and sleep in the rain. They carry with them not just their bows, but a distinct lack of reverence for the gilded aristocracy across the field. In the camps, they sharpen their stakes and fletch their arrows with goose feathers, joking in coarse English dialects that the French nobility would find unintelligible. They are the first hint of a national army, fighting not just for a feudal lord, but for a king and country identity that is slowly beginning to form. There is a quiet intimacy to the archer's craft. While the knight is encased in metal, isolated from the world by his helmet, the archer feels the wind on his cheek. He knows that a crosswind will drift his arrow left, that humid air is heavier and will shorten his range. He is connected to the environment in a way the armoured man is not. He must listen to the rhythm of the battle, waiting for the signal, the raising of the baton, the shout of knock, draw, loose. It is a rhythm of tension and release, a heartbeat of violence that will pulse through the fields of France for 100 years. As we leave the practice butts and return to the campaign trail of 1346, remember this simple yew-stave. It is the silent protagonist of the story, the tool that will allow a small island nation to punch far above its weight, turning the green fields of France red with the blood of the overconfident. The stage is set for its debut. King Edward is marching through Normandy, burning and pillaging, drawing the French king out. The two forces are converging on a small town called Crécy en Poitiers. The archers are stringing their bows. The storm is about to break. The sky over northern France turns a bruised, sullen purple. It is late afternoon on August 26, 1346, and the air is so heavy with humidity that it feels like a damp wool blanket draped over the lungs. We are near the forest of Crécy en Poitiers, on a gentle slope that rises above the mundane farmland. King Edward III has chosen this ground with the meticulous eye of a master craftsman. He knows he is outnumbered, perhaps 3-1, perhaps more. But he also knows that numbers are vanity, while terrain is sanity. He positions his men at the top of the ridge, flanking them with wagons and digging pits to break the ankles of charging horses. And then he does something extraordinary for a medieval king. He dismounts. He walks among his men, speaking not with the distant roar of a demigod, but with the quiet confidence of a captain. He tells them to eat, to rest, to sit on the grass. There is a strange, picnic-like atmosphere in the English lines, a calm eye in the centre of the hurricane. High above, a windmill creaks slowly in the gathering breeze, the vantage point from which Edward will watch the day unfold. Across the valley, the French army arrives in a chaotic, glittering river of steel. King Philip VI has been chasing the English for days, and his army is strung out along the roads, tired, hungry, and arguing. The French command structure is less a pyramid and more a noisy committee meeting where everyone is shouting and no one is listening. The prudent move would be to camp, rest for the night, and attack at dawn. Philip actually tries to give this order. He sends messengers riding back to halt the vanguard, but the French nobility is afflicted by a dangerous mixture of pride and impatience. When the leading knights see the English waiting on the hill, they refuse to stop. To stop would be to let someone else get the glory. They push forward, the rearguard shoving the vanguard, a slow-motion traffic jam of aristocrats vying for the best spot in the queue to death. And then the heavens open. A summer thunderstorm of biblical intensity breaks over the field. Rain lashes down, turning the dust to slick mud in an instant. Thunder cracks like a whip, and flashes of lightning illuminate the terrified eyes of horses. It is as if nature herself is announcing the violence to come. In the English lines, the archers quickly unstring their bows, tucking the bowstrings under their helmets to keep them dry. It is a small professional detail. A dry string snaps, a wet string stretches. Across the field, the Genoese crossbowmen, the mercenaries hired by the French, have no such luxury. Their intricate weapons cannot be easily unstrung. The rain soaks the cords, slacking the tension, stealing the power from their shots before a single bolt is fired. When the rain stops, the sun bursts out from beneath the clouds, low in the western sky. It shines directly into the eyes of the French, dazzling them, whilst illuminating the English on the ridge in a golden spotlight. Philip orders the Genoese forward. They are tired, they have marched all day, and their heavy parvises, the large shields they use for protection, are still in the baggage train miles behind. Reluctantly, they advance. They give a great shout, a hoot designed to frighten the enemy. The English do not answer. They stand in terrifying silence. The Genoese shout again, step forward, and shout a third time. Finally, they raise their crossbows and fire, but the wet strings betray them. The bolts fall short, harmlessly thumping into the muddy slope. Then the English move. It is a single, fluid motion, like a wave rippling through wheat. Thousands of longbowmen step forward, draw to the ear, and loose. The chronicler Jean Froissart writes that the arrows fell like snow. It is a poetic description for a horrific reality. The white fletching of the arrows creates a blizzard of death that descends on the Genoese. Panic ensues. They turn to run, but their retreat blocks the path of the French knights behind them. The French nobility, seeing their mercenaries retreat, do not see a tactical withdrawal. They see treason. King Philip, in a rage, shouts a command that surely ranks among the coldest in history. "Kill me these scoundrels, for they stop up our road without any reason." The French knights lower their lances and charge, not at the English, but into the backs of their own allies. It is a massacre of the innocent by the arrogant, a chaotic, fratricidal, crushed salad of men and horses in the mud. Through this tangled mess of dying mercenaries, the French cavalry tries to reach the English lines. They charge up the wet, slippery slope, into the blinding sun and the relentless arrow storm. They are brave, undeniably. They charge 15, perhaps 16 times, but each charge is broken by the invisible wall of yew and ash. The arrows find the unprotected horses, sending knights tumbling into the mud, where they lie like overturned turtles, heavy and helpless. In the thick of the fighting on the English right wing is Edward's 16-year-old son, the Black Prince. He is hard-pressed, the fighting fierce and hand-to-hand. A messenger rushes to the windmill, begging King Edward to send reinforcements to save his son. The king asks, "Is my son dead, or unhorsed, or so wounded he cannot help himself?" The messenger says no. Then, Edward replies, "Let the boy win his spurs." It is a gamble of breathtaking coldness, or perhaps supreme confidence. He leaves his son to fight, to forge his legend in the heat of the moment. Amidst the slaughter, there is a moment of tragic, obsolete romance. King John of Bohemia is fighting on the French side. He is old and blind, unable to see the battle, but he hears the clash of steel and refuses to be left out. He orders his knights to tie their horses' bridles to his, so they can lead him into the fray, and he can strike one blow for honour. They oblige him. They ride together into the storm of arrows, a nod of chivalry in a world that is rapidly forgetting what that word means. The next morning, they are found still tied together, all dead, the blind king in the centre of his loyal guard. It is a poignant epitaph for the old way of war, brave, romantic, and utterly doomed against the cold efficiency of the longbow. There's also a strange new sound on the field at Crécy, a booming roar that is not thunder. The English have brought a few primitive cannons, riboldequins. They fire stone balls or metal arrows. They do little physical damage compared to the longbows, but the noise and the smoke terrify the horses and the men who have never seen such devilry. It is a whisper of the future, a hint that gunpowder will one day silence the bow and the sword alike. But for now, the day belongs to the archer. As night falls, the fighting dies down. The French army has not just been defeated, it has been dismantled. King Philip flees the field with a tiny retinue, riding to a nearby castle, pounding on the door in the dark, crying out, "Open! It is the grand fortune of France." But fortune has left him. On the dark slopes of Crécy, the silence returns, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the call of looters moving through the heather like ghosts. The flower of French nobility lies crushed in the mud. The English light fires, not to celebrate, but to see. They remain disciplined, sleeping in their ranks, wary of a counterattack that will never come. The world has shifted. The invincible knight, the tank of the medieval world, has been halted by a piece of wood and a peasant's strong arm. The Battle of Crécy is over, but the war has only just found its rhythm. Edward III does not march on Paris. He turns his gaze toward the coast, to a port city that will become the next stage of this long, sorrowful drama. He looks toward Calais. We leave the blood-soaked slopes of Crécy and follow the coast north, where the land dissolves into a flat, melancholy expanse of sand dunes and salt marshes. It is September 1346, and the flush of victory is beginning to cool into the hard, grinding reality of a siege. Edward III stands before the walls of Calais, the key to France. This is not a castle on a hill. It is a fortress floating in a sea of water and mud, protected by double moats and walls that rise sheer from the canals. Edward knows that taking Calais by storm is impossible. Ladders would sink in the mire. Siege engines would rot in the damp. And so, he decides to starve it into submission. He does not simply camp outside, he builds a new city. The English soldiers construct a sprawling town of timber and thatch, which they name Villeneuve-la-Hardie, or Brave Newtown. It has a marketplace, a council hall, and even regular streets. It is a surreal mirror image. Inside Calais, an old city dying of hunger. Outside, a new city feasting on supplies brought freely across the Channel. The siege drags on through the bitter winter of 1346 and into the spring of 1347. Inside the walls, life shrinks to the gnawing ache of the belly. The governor of Calais, Jean de Vienne, is a man of iron will, but cannot feed children. First the horses are eaten, then the dogs, then the rats. Chroniclers tell us that eventually the citizens are reduced to boiling leather boots and chewing on the softened hide, imagining the flavour of meat. It is a slow, quiet horror, measured not in sword strokes, but in the fading cries of the weak. Edward, in a grim act of calculated cruelty, allows the bouches inutiles, the useless mouths, the old, the sick, the very young, to leave the city early in the siege to save food. But later, when a second group tries to leave, he refuses to let them pass. They are trapped in the ditch between the walls and the English camp, caught between the indifference of their enemy and the helplessness of their defenders, perishing in the cold rain while the English watch from their warm fires. It is a stain on the chivalric record that no amount of victory can wash away. By summer 1347, the situation is desperate. The citizens of Calais look to the horizon, praying for the oriflamme, the battle standard of King Philip VI, and finally they see it. The French army appears on the ridge of Sangata, a magnificent host gleaming in the sun. Hope, sharp and painful, flares in the hearts of the starving garrison. But the terrain that protects Calais also imprisons it. The marshes are impassable, the beaches are guarded by the English fleet, and the only bridge is heavily fortified by Edward's men. Philip looks at the English defences, looks at his own trap, and decides the risk is too great. In a moment of crushing betrayal, he orders his army to turn around and march away. From the walls of Calais, the citizens watch the dust settle on the road to Paris. They have been abandoned. The silence that follows is heavier than any bombardment. Jean de Vienne climbs to the highest tower and lowers the royal standard. The gates open, not for a sortie, but for a messenger. The surrender is unconditional. Edward, his patience worn thin by 11 months of stubborn resistance, is in a cold rage. He demands that the entire garrison be put to the sword. His advisers, however, plead with him. They warn him that such a massacre would invite retaliation against English prisoners. Edward pauses, his eyes hard as flint, and offers a compromise that feels more like a ritual of humiliation than mercy. He says he will spare the city if 6 of its most prominent citizens, burghers, walk out to him barefoot and bareheaded, wearing only their shirts, with heavy ropes tied around their necks, carrying the keys to the city and the castle. On them, Edward declares, I will work my will. Inside the town hall of Calais, the bells toll a mournful dirge. The richest man in the city, Eustache de Saint-Pierre, stands up. He is old, respected, a man who has everything to lose. He volunteers to be the first. Then another rises, and another, until there are 6. They strip off their fine velvet robes, the symbols of their status, and don the rough linen shirts of penitence. The ropes are placed around their necks, a visceral symbol of criminal execution. They walk out of the gates, thin and pale from months of starvation, carrying the heavy iron keys. The English camp falls silent as they approach. It is a piece of political theatre so raw and emotional that even the hardened soldiers are moved to tears. They kneel before Edward, offering the keys and their lives. But Edward is not moved. He glares at them, his face red with the memory of the time and treasure this siege has cost him. He barks the order, Call the headsman. The English nobles, including the brave Sir Walter Manny, beg the king to reconsider, arguing that killing these unarmed men will tarnish his glorious reputation. Edward refuses to listen. He grinds his teeth and waves the executioner forward. The blade is drawn. The sand is waiting to drink their blood. And then a figure moves from the king's side. It is Queen Philippa of Hainaut. She is heavily pregnant, her body swollen with the king's child. In a moment that has been immortalized in stone and paint, she falls to her knees in the dirt before her husband. The court holds its breath. It is incredibly rare, almost taboo for a queen to publicly oppose a king, yet here she is, weeping. She speaks softly, her voice carrying over the sound of the wind. "Ah, gentle sir," she says, "since I have crossed the sea in great peril to see you, I have never asked you for anything. Now I humbly pray, for the sake of the Son of the Holy Mary and for the love of me, that you will have mercy on these 6 men." Historians have long debated this moment. Was it a spontaneous act of compassion? Or was it a carefully choreographed good cop, bad cop routine, a piece of diplomatic theatre designed to allow Edward to show mercy without looking weak? If he forgave them on his own, he might seem soft. If he forgave them because his pregnant wife begged him, he appears as a chivalrous husband honouring his lady. We may never know the truth of his heart, but we know the result. Edward looks down at her, the silence stretching out until the tension is unbearable. Finally, he sighs, the anger draining out of him, like the tide going out. "Lady," he says, "I wish you were anywhere else but here. You have entreated in such a manner that I cannot refuse you. I give them to you. Do with them what you please." He hands the prisoners to her. Philippa does not just free them, she feeds them, clothes them, and gives them money before sending them away safely. The ropes are removed, the headsman sheathes his sword, and the 6 burghers of Calais walk away, alive, into the pages of history. Calais is now English. It is now. Edward orders the majority of the French population to leave, repopulating the town with English merchants and soldiers. It becomes an English island on the continent, a little England of wool warehouses and English ale, a strategic dagger pointed at the heart of France. It will remain in English hands for 2 centuries, the only conquest of the war that truly lasts. The phrase, "Calais is written on my heart," will be uttered by a dying English queen centuries later, a testament to its enduring value. But as the sun sets over the captured city in 1347, a shadow longer and darker than any war is creeping across Europe. While Edward celebrates his triumph and plans his next campaign, a ship has docked in a Sicilian port, carrying rats with fleas that harbour a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. The war of men is about to be interrupted by the war of nature. The archers and the knights, the kings and the queens, are all about to face an enemy that respects no border, accepts no ransom, and wears no crown. The Black Death is coming, and it will turn the battlefields of France into the least of humanity's worries. The year is 1348. The flags of victory still flutter over the ramparts of Calais, but a new deeper silence is spreading across the world, a silence not of peace, but of emptiness. From the bustling ports of the Mediterranean, rumours travel north faster than any army. Traders speak of the great mortality, a pestilence in the east, where bodies are stacked like cordwood, and cities fall quiet in a matter of weeks. The English and French, locked in their bitter feud, pay little heed at first. War is their reality. Disease is merely a familiar seasonal nuisance, but this is no summer fever. It is a biological apocalypse, carried in the gut of a flea, riding on the back of a rat, scurrying up the mooring ropes of merchant ships docking in Marseille, Bordeaux, and eventually the English port of Melcombe-Regis. The war, which seemed the most important thing on earth, is about to be rendered devastatingly irrelevant. The arrival of the Black Death acts as a grim referee, stepping between the 2 exhausted combatants and raising a hand of decaying flesh to stop the fight. It is impossible to muster an army when the men are dying in their beds before they can reach the muster fields. The symptoms are terrifyingly swift: a sudden fever, shivering fits, and then the appearance of the buboes, black swollen lymph nodes in the groin or armpit, hard as rocks and agonizingly painful. For most, death follows within days, often accompanied by coughing up blood. It strikes the knight in his castle and the peasant in his hut with equal indifference. In the crowded camps of soldiers, where sanitation is an afterthought and men sleep huddled together for warmth, the plague moves like wildfire through dry grass. The English army, flushed with the wealth of French plunder, suddenly finds that gold cannot buy health. The silk robes and silver chalices looted from French towns become contaminated tokens of doom, passing the sickness from the dead to the living. In France, the devastation is absolute. A country already scorched by English chevauchés now faces a scourge that hollows out entire villages. Fields lie fallow because there is no one left to plough them. Cattle wander aimlessly, lowing for masters who will never come. The chroniclers of the time struggle to find words to describe the scale of the loss. Jean de Venette writes, "Such a shortage of workers ensued that the humble turned up their noses at employment and could scarcely be persuaded to serve the eminent for triple wages." The social order, rigidly defined for centuries, begins to crack. The scarcity of labour gives the surviving peasants a sudden, terrifying leverage. If a lord wants his harvest brought in, he must pay what the peasant asks or starve. The silence of the plague years is the sound of the feudal system slowly dying. The war does not end, but it enters a strange twilight paralysis. Major campaigns are suspended. Truces are signed not out of goodwill, but out of sheer biological necessity. Yet even in this horror, human nature remains stubbornly violent. Small bands of mercenaries, released from service or simply deserted, roam the countryside like packs of wolves. They are the routiers, or free companies. With no king to pay them and no war to fight, they declare war on everyone. They seize castles, extort protection money from terrified villagers, and burn what they cannot steal. In a world where death is everywhere, these men decide to become its masters rather than its victims. They wear mismatched armour, a motley collection of stolen heraldry, and their loyalty belongs only to the captain who can promise them the most gold. The suffering of the French peasantry during this interlude is perhaps worse than during the official war. They are caught between the hammer of the plague and the anvil of the brigands. There is a grim theological crisis brewing as well. The church, the bedrock of medieval life, seems powerless. Priests die just as quickly as sinners. In fact, they die faster, for they are the ones visiting the sick to administer last rites. The sight of holy men falling by the thousands shakes the faith of the common people. If God's chosen servants cannot stop this, who can? A dark fatalism settles over the population. Art begins to change. The danse macabre, or dance of death, becomes a popular motif. Skeletons dancing hand in hand with kings, popes and peasants, a visual reminder that the grave is the only true equalizer. It is a philosophy that will eventually feed into the Renaissance, but for now it is merely a coping mechanism for a world that feels abandoned by heaven. King Philip VI of France dies in 1350, not of the plague, but of old age and perhaps a broken heart, leaving his son John II, known as John the Good, to inherit a broken kingdom. Across the Channel, Edward III survives, but his daughter, Princess Joan, does not. She dies of the plague in Bordeaux, while on her way to marry the son of the King of Castile. Edward is devastated. In a letter to the Spanish king, he writes with rare vulnerability, "We have sent your serenity a daughter whom we loved with perfect love, but death which is terrible to all kings, has snatched her away. It is a reminder that even the victor of Crécy cannot defeat this enemy. The plague does not care about dynastic alliances. By the mid-1350s, the worst of the first wave has passed. The survivors blink in the sunlight, looking around at a world that is quieter, emptier, and strangely flush with cash. With fewer people to inherit wealth, the survivors are often richer. A peasant, who might have owned one cow, now owns 3, inherited from dead uncles and cousins. This economic shift creates a new friction. The nobility, alarmed by the rising wages and the newfound confidence of the lower classes, tries to pass laws to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. It is an attempt to turn back the clock, to legislate the world back to 1340. But the genie is out of the bottle. The tension between the desperate desire of the lords to maintain their status and the rising expectations of the commons will eventually explode. But for now, the drums of war are beginning to beat again. The truce expires. The great mortality has thinned the ranks, but a new generation of soldiers has grown up in its shadow, young men who have known nothing but death and stories of glory. They are eager to prove that they are still alive. Edward's son, the Black Prince, is now a man in his prime, a warrior of terrifying competence. He looks at the map of France not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. The pause is over. The silence is broken by the sound of armour being buckled and swords being sharpened. The plague has cleared the board, removing the old pieces, but the game remains the same, and in 1355 the Black Prince launches a raid that will make the chevauchés of his father look like acts of mercy. He rides out not to conquer, but to burn, a great chevauché that cuts a scar of fire from Bordeaux to the Mediterranean. The war has survived the apocalypse. It has mutated, becoming leaner, crueler, and more desperate. The dead are buried, but the living have not yet had their fill of blood. In the annals of history, few figures cast a silhouette as distinct or as ominous as Edward of Woodstock, Prince of Wales. To the modern mind, he is the Black Prince, a title that conjures images of a grim avenger clad in midnight-coloured steel, a wraith of the battlefield. But let us step closer to the man himself, stripping away centuries of accumulated legend to find the human heart beating beneath the breastplate. In 1355, Edward is 25 years old, the eldest son of King Edward III, and he is the undisputed superstar of the English court. He is tall, handsome in the Plantagenet fashion, extravagant with money, and possessed of a charisma that draws men to him like moths to a torch. He is not a brooding villain. He is a golden youth, a lover of high-stakes gambling, fine jewels, and the adoration of the crowd. He has established his own court in Bordeaux, the capital of English Aquitaine, a court that rivals London in its opulence. Here, amidst the vineyards and the sun-drenched stone of southern France, he holds tournaments and feasts, acting every inch the future king. But beneath the velvet surcoat lies a military mind of terrifying clarity. He understands, perhaps better than his father, that the way to break France is not just to defeat its armies, but to break its spirit and its bank account. Historians still argue fiercely about the origin of his famous nickname. There is no contemporary evidence that he was called the Black Prince during his lifetime. To his friends and enemies, he was simply the Prince, or Edward of Woodstock. The name first appears in records nearly 2 centuries later. Some suggest it refers to a suit of black ceremonial armour he supposedly wore at tournaments, perhaps enamelled or burnished to a dark sheen. A suit of black armour hangs above his tomb in Canterbury Cathedral, though it is now rusted and dull, its original colour, a mystery lost to oxidation and time. And others, more cynically, argue the name is a French invention, referring not to the medal on his chest, but to the darkness of his deeds, the smoke of burning villages, and the blackened ruin he left in his wake. In France, he is not a hero. He is an ogre, a bogeyman used to frighten children into obedience. "Be good," a mother might whisper, "or the Black Prince will come for you." In the autumn of 1355, Edward launches a campaign that will cement this dark reputation. It is known as the Grand Chevauchée, a great raid. He leads an Anglo-Gascon army out of Bordeaux, not to conquer territory, but to destroy it. He marches straight into the heart of Languedoc, a region that has known peace for decades, a land of fat sheep, prosperous merchants, and unfortified towns. The strategy is brutally simple: economic warfare. By burning the crops, destroying the mills and looting the towns, he intends to deny the French king, John II, the tax revenue he needs to pay for the war. It is a strategy of war, feeding war. The army moves like a plague of locusts. They do not carry heavy baggage. They live off the land, taking what they need and burning the rest. The smoke from their passing is said to be visible for 50 miles, a dark smudge blotting out the southern sun. Imagine the sensory overload of this march. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and the sweet, cloying scent of unharvested grapes fermenting in the heat. The sound is a constant low rumble, the tramp of thousands of horses, the creaking of wagons groaning under the weight of looted silver, silk, and wine. The English soldiers are in high spirits. They are becoming rich beyond their wildest dreams. A simple archer might find himself drinking vintage wine from a golden chalice, wearing a stolen velvet cloak over his rough woolen tunic. It is a carnival of destruction. Yet amidst this chaos, the prince maintains a strict, almost paradoxical code of chivalry. He treats captured knights with exquisite courtesy, dining with them and exchanging pleasantries, for they are people of quality who can pay a ransom. But for the peasantry, whose livelihoods are going up in smoke, there is no such mercy. They are merely the grass trampled beneath the elephants. This duality, the perfect gentleman to his peers, the ruthless destroyer to the commons, is the defining contradiction of the age. The raid is a tactical masterpiece, but a humanitarian disaster. Edward marches all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, dipping his horse's hooves in the salt water at Narbonne as a gesture of defiance, proving he can ride unopposed through the King of France's backyard. He returns to Bordeaux, laden with so much plunder that the economy of the region is destabilized by the sudden influx of gold. But King John II, the new French monarch, can no longer ignore the humiliation. He is a brave, stubborn man, obsessed with the idea of chivalry, perhaps to a fault. He sees Edward's raid not just as a strategic problem, but as a personal insult. He begins to gather a massive army in the north, calling upon the arrière-ban, the levy of all able-bodied men. He is determined to catch the prince, to crush this upstart, and to restore the honour of the Valois line. As the summer of 1356 dawns, the prince decides to strike again. He marches north from Aquitaine, aiming to link up with another English force moving down from Normandy. But this time, the raid does not go as smoothly. The French are ready. Bridges are destroyed, fords are guarded, and the local population is hostile. The prince finds himself manoeuvring in a hostile landscape, his army shrinking as sickness and skirmishes take their toll. He is carrying an immense amount of loot, which slows him down. It is difficult to outrun an army when your wagons are full of heavy tapestries and silver plate. It is a classic gambler's dilemma: drop the winnings and run, or try to carry it all home and risk losing everything. Edward, true to his nature, refuses to abandon the prize. By September 1356, the trap begins to close. King John II has outmanoeuvred the prince, crossing the Loire River and effectively cutting off Edward's retreat to Bordeaux. The English army is tired, hungry, and vastly outnumbered. They are near the city of Poitiers, in a landscape of rolling hills and vineyards. The prince knows he has been caught. He tries to negotiate, offering to return all the loot and not bear arms against France for 7 years in exchange for safe passage. It is a humble offer, a sign of just how desperate his situation has become. But King John, flushed with the confidence of superior numbers and urged on by his hot-headed advisers, refuses. He demands that the prince surrender himself as a prisoner. This Edward cannot do. He is the heir to England. To surrender without a fight would be a shame worse than death. The negotiations fail. The Sunday truce expires. On the night of September 18th, the prince gathers his captains. They are a hardened, loyal brotherhood. Sir John Chandos, his closest friend and a tactician of genius, the Earl of Warwick, and the Captal de Buch, a Gascon lord of immense bravery. They know the odds are against them. The French army is fresh, well equipped, and perhaps twice the size of their own. But Edward is calm. He has been here before. At Crécy, he knows that the French have a weakness, their pride. He knows they will attack, and he knows that if he can choose the ground, he can make them bleed for every inch. He orders his men to move to a defensive position on a wooded slope, surrounded by thick hedges that will break up a cavalry charge. It is a position designed to frustrate, to funnel, and to kill. As the moon rises over the fields of Maupertuis, the soldiers sharpen their swords and check their bowstrings. The prince sleeps in his armour. The black steel, or perhaps just plain steel reflecting the dark night, rising and falling with his breath. The gambler has placed his bet. Tomorrow the wheel will spin. The sun rises on September 19th, 1356, revealing a landscape that looks less like a battlefield and more like a farmer's nightmare. The English army is entrenched on a ridge near the Maupertuis woods, their position laced with thick, thorny hedges and vineyards. To reach them, the French must navigate a narrow lane, a natural funnel that renders their superior numbers useless. King John II, having studied the disaster of Crécy, has made a radical decision. He orders his vanguard to remain mounted to smash the archers, but the vast majority of his knights, the cream of French chivalry, are ordered to dismount. They cut their lances down to 5 feet, turning them into heavy spears, and prepare to march up the hill on foot. It is a logical overcorrection. If horses were the problem at Crécy, remove the horses. But they have forgotten that a knight in full-plate armour is designed to sit in a saddle, not to hike through soft earth and tangled vines under a burning sun. They are transforming themselves from terrifying cavalry into slow metallic tortoises. The battle begins with the deceptive feint. The Black Prince, seeing the French hesitate, orders some of his baggage wagons to move as if he is retreating. It is the oldest trick in the book, yet it works. The French marshals, terrified that their prey is escaping, order the mounted vanguard to charge into the narrow lane. It is a suicide run. As the French knights thunder into the confined space, the English archers step out from behind the hedges. The range is point blank. They do not aim for the armoured men, but for the horses, specifically the flanks and rumps unprotected by the heavy chamfron headplates. The animals rear and kick in agony, throwing their riders and blocking the path with a writhing wall of horseflesh. The narrow lane becomes a killing zone. Behind this carnage, the main body of the French army, the dismounted knights led by the Dauphin, the king's heir, begins its trudge up the slope. They are exhausted before they even reach the enemy. The ground is slick with mud and blood, and the heat inside their helmets is stifling. Yet they fight with desperate courage. They crash into the English line with the sound of a collapsing ironmongery. For hours, the battle hangs in the balance. It is a grueling, shoving match of shields and axes. The English archers, having run out of arrows, drop their bows and draw daggers, running out to stab at the vulnerable gaps in the French armour. The islets, the backs of knees, the armpits. It is ungentlemanly, brutal, and effective. Then comes the stroke of genius. The Captal de Buch, the Gascon commander fighting for the English, takes a small force of mounted knights and swings wide around a hidden rise in the land, circling behind the French army. At the critical moment, just as the English line is buckling under the sheer weight of the French advance, the Captal's men charge into the French rear. The French, thinking a fresh English army has arrived, panic. Their formation shatters. It is the classic hammer and anvil tactic, executed with surgical precision. The French army dissolves into a terrified mob, fleeing back toward the city of Poitiers. But one man does not flee. King John II stands his ground. He is surrounded by a knot of his most loyal retainers, swinging a heavy battle axe with the fury of a man who knows his kingdom is lost but refuses to lose his honour. Beside him stands his 14-year-old son, Philip. The boy is too young to fight effectively, but he acts as his father's eyes. Historical accounts give us the poignant dialogue of the boy shouting over the din of battle, "Father, guard to the right. Father, guard to the left." It is a heartbreaking image. A father fighting to the death while his child tries to keep him alive. The English and Gascon soldiers swarm around them, eager to capture such a prize. They are shouting, grabbing at the king's surcoat, arguing over who has the right to take him. "Yield, sir! Yield!" they cry. The king, battered and exhausted, finally lowers his axe. He asks to see his cousin, the Prince of Wales, but the prince is elsewhere. Instead, a banished French knight fighting for the English, Denis de Morbecque, pushes through the crowd. "Sire," he says, "I am a knight of Artois. Yield yourself to me, and I will lead you to the prince." King John hands him his right gauntlet, the universal sign of surrender. The fighting stops. The King of France is a prisoner. That evening, a scene unfolds that perfectly encapsulates the schizophrenia of the medieval mind. In the English tent, a magnificent supper is prepared. King John II, the captive, sits at the high table, treated with all the reverence due a monarch. The Black Prince, the victor, refuses to sit. Instead, he waits on the French king, serving him food and wine on bended knee. He speaks to John with elaborate humility, praising his bravery, telling him that he had won the prize of valour that day. It is a display of chivalry so blindingly bright, it almost erases the memory of the thousands of commoners butchered in the mud outside. The prince is playing a role, certainly, but there is a genuine respect there. They are members of the same exclusive club, the Club of Kings, and they treat each other with a professional courtesy that they would never extend to a peasant. King John, though humiliated by his capture, is charmed by the prince's grace. He is safe. He will not be executed. He is far too valuable. He is a walking winning lottery ticket. The capture of King John is a catastrophe for France. The head of the snake has been cut off, but the body is still thrashing. The king is taken to Bordeaux and then to London, where his imprisonment is the stuff of fairy tales. He is housed in the Savoy Palace, allowed to keep a court, hunt, and order expensive wines and clothes. He becomes a celebrity in London. The English crowds cheer him when he rides by, fascinated by this trophy of their victory. But back in France, the reality is far less glamorous. The Dauphin, young and inexperienced, is left to rule a country that is bankrupt, defeated, and leaderless. The mercenaries, realizing there is no one to stop them, run wild. The peasants who have been taxed to pay for the king's wars and now must be taxed again to pay his astronomical ransom, set at 3 million gold écus, a sum so large it is effectively imaginary, reach their breaking point. Historians often debate whether the capture of King John was actually good for the English war effort in the long run. On paper, it was a triumph, but in reality, it removed the one man who had the authority to sign a peace treaty. With John in a comfortable prison in London, the French government fractured into competing factions that the English could not easily negotiate with. You cannot make peace with a vacuum. And so, while the Black Prince is toasted in London as the greatest warrior of the age, the victory at Poitiers plants the seeds of a chaos that will consume France for decades. The war has moved from the battlefield to the bargaining table. But the suffering of the common people has only just begun. The Jacquerie is coming, a peasant uprising born of pure distilled rage. The knights have failed to protect the realm. Now, the people will try to take matters into their own callous-hardened hands. The glory of Poitiers was a drug, and by 1381, England is coming down from the high. The captured King John II has died in captivity, his ransom only partially paid, and the war has devolved into a sluggish, expensive stalemate of sieges and skirmishes that drain the treasury without offering the dopamine hit of a great victory. The old king, Edward III, is dead, and the Black Prince, that star of the battlefield, has also passed away, succumbing to a dysentery-like illness that withered his mighty frame. The crown now sits on the head of the prince's son. Richard II, a boy of only 10 when he ascends, now 14, a child ruling a kingdom of angry, hungry men. To pay for the endless war in France, the English government introduces a new and hated innovation, the poll tax. It is a blunt instrument of finance, demanding a shilling from every adult, regardless of their wealth. To a rich merchant, a shilling is a forgotten coin in the bottom of a purse. To a ploughman, it is weeks of labour, the difference between eating and starving. It is a tax that ignores the reality of the poor to fund the ambitions of the rich, and it strikes a spark in the dry tinder of English society. The plague, remember, has already changed the math of the world. The survivors know their worth. They are no longer content to be silent gears in the feudal machine. In the villages of Essex and Kent, the whispers begin, not of reform, but of revolution. The voice of this revolution is a hedge priest named John Ball. He has been preaching in open fields, defying the church hierarchy, asking a question that cuts to the very bone of medieval society. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? It is a rhyme of dangerous simplicity. He is asking, essentially, where in the Bible does it say that one man should ride a horse and wear silk while another walks in the mud and wears rags? There is no answer in Scripture, only in the laws of men. The uprising begins not with an army, but with a refusal. When the tax collectors arrive in Brentwood, the villagers simply say no. The no becomes a shout. The shout becomes a riot. And suddenly, the tax collectors are fleeing for their lives. The rebellion spreads like ink in water. From the hop fields of Kent emerges a leader, Wat Tyler. Historians know frustratingly little about him. Was he a tiler of roofs? A soldier who served in France? His command of military discipline suggests he knew his way around a battlefield. He organizes the ragtag mob into something resembling an army, and they turn their faces toward London. Imagine the sight of them marching on the capital. Thousands of men armed with rusty swords, longbows, axes and scythes. They are not a mindless horde. They are disciplined, driven by a cold, righteous fury. They capture castles on the way, burning the tax rolls, the paper memories of their servitude, but leaving the buildings standing. They are erasing their debts with fire. When they reach London, the unthinkable happens. The gates are open to them. The poor of the city, seeing their brothers in the fields, lower the drawbridge. The mob pours into the streets. They target the symbols of their oppression. The Savoy Palace, the magnificent home of John of Gaunt, the king's uncle and the most hated man in England, is systematically destroyed. But here is the fascinating detail. They do not loot. A man caught trying to steal a silver goblet is executed by his own comrades. They smash the gold, they burn the tapestries, they throw the jewels into the Thames. We are zealots for truth and justice, not thieves and robbers, they declare. It is a terrifying kind of purity. They are not here to get rich. They are here to reset the world. The young king, Richard II, retreats to the Tower of London, looking out from the high stone walls at the smoke rising from his city. He is 14 years old. Most boys his age are worrying about lessons or girls. He is worrying about being torn apart by his own subjects. In a moment of extraordinary bravery, or perhaps the fearlessness of youth that does not yet understand death, he agrees to meet the rebels. The first meeting at Mile End is a concession. He grants their demands. He promises to abolish serfdom. He promises a flat rent for land. He hands out charters of freedom, like sweets. But it is not enough. The more radical wing of the rebellion, led by Tyler, wants more. They want the aristocracy stripped of their lands. They want a world turned upside down. The final confrontation takes place at Smithfield, a market area just outside the city walls. It is June 15th, 1781. The king rides out on a white palfrey surrounded by a small group of anxious nobles. Wat Tyler rides out to meet him on a small pony. The contrast is stark. The golden child king and the rough-handed labourer. Tyler behaves with a shocking lack of deference. He shakes the king's hand, an unthinkable breach of protocol. He calls for a flagon of water, rinses his mouth and spits it out in front of the monarch. He demands that all men should be equal, save for the king. It is a moment of supreme tension. The air is thick with the smell of horse sweat and fear. Historians still argue about what happened next. Did Tyler reach for his dagger? Did he insult a squire? Or was it a pre-planned assassination? Suddenly the Mayor of London, William Walworth, lashes out. He strikes Tyler with a cutlass, cutting him down. The rebel leader falls from his horse, bleeding into the dust. The rebel army, seeing their leader fall, draws their bows. "They have killed our captain," they shout. The arrows are nocked. A single volley would kill the king and his entire retinue. History hangs by a thread. In that split second, Richard II does something that saves the monarchy and dooms the revolt. He does not flee. He spurs his horse forward, riding alone toward the line of archers. He raises his hand, not in anger, but in command. "Sirs, would you shoot your king?" he cries. "I will be your captain. I will be your leader. Follow me into the fields, and I will grant you all you ask." It is a masterstroke of psychology. The peasants, conditioned by centuries of reverence for the anointed monarch, lower their bows. They follow him, mesmerized by his courage. They believe him. They do not know that they are being led, not to freedom, but to a trap. Once the rebels are dispersed, the king's captaincy turns into vengeance. The charters of freedom are revoked. Serfs you are, and serfs you will remain, Richard reportedly tells a delegation later, only worse than before. The leaders, including the priest John Ball, are hunted down and executed. Their heads are displayed on London Bridge, staring blindly south toward the lands they tried to free. The revolt is crushed. The status quo is restored with the brutal efficiency of the hangman's noose. But while the rebellion failed, the psychological dam has broken. The English peasantry has tasted their own power. They know now that the nobles are not gods, but men who bleed and fear. The poll tax is quietly abandoned, never to be levied again. The feudal system does not die at Smithfield, but it receives a mortal wound. The war in France has come home, and the cost has been paid in the blood of the common people. The fire is out, but the ashes will remain warm for a very long time, a reminder to every king that their power rests on the shoulders of those they tax. England returns to the war across the Channel, but it is a changed nation, uneasy and watchful. The boy king has won, but in his victory he has learned a dangerous lesson in autocracy. that will eventually lead to his own tragic downfall. The wheel of fortune turns, indifferent to whether one wears a crown or a cap. The years drift by now, not like a rushing river, but like leaves floating on a stagnant pond. We've entered a strange season in the long saga of the 100 Years' War, a period historians often call the truce, though the exhaustion might be a more accurate title. From the late 1380s into the early 1400s, the great armies have largely gone home. The blackened fields have greened over. The burned thatch of the cottages has been replaced, and a generation of children is born who know the war only as a story told by toothless grandfathers by the hearth. It is a time of velvet diplomacy and magnificent pageantry, where the aggression of kings is sublimated into the spectacle of the tournament. War has become a game, played in bright sunlight with blunted lances and rigid rules, a performance of chivalry that tries desperately to forget the mud and slaughter of the real thing. Consider the famous tournament at Saint-Anglever in 1390. 3 French knights, bored by the peace and eager to prove that French valour did not die at Poitiers, set up their tents near Calais and challenge all comers to a joust. For 30 days they hold the field against over 100 English and foreign knights. It is a scene of almost unbearable glamour. The snapping of heraldic flags in the ocean breeze, the thunder of hooves on packed earth, the shattering of ashwood lances that explodes like confetti. The knights bow to the ladies. They feast together in the evenings and they compliment each other's horsemanship. It is civilized, it is beautiful, it is also a complete illusion. While the nobility plays at King Arthur in the lists, the foundations of both kingdoms are rotting from the inside out. The peace is not built on stone. It is built on the crumbling sanity of a king and the stolen crown of another. In France, the tragedy centres on King Charles VI. He is known early in his reign as Charles the Beloved, a handsome, athletic young monarch who seems poised to restore the glory of the Valois line. But there is a crack in the crystal. In the summer of 1392, while riding through a forest on a sweltering August day, something snaps in his mind. A leper by the roadside shouts a warning. A page drops a lance with a sudden clang, and the king draws his sword. In a frenzy of paranoia, he attacks his own escort, killing several men before he is overpowered. It is the first descent into a madness that will haunt France for decades. His illness is cyclical. He has periods of perfect clarity followed by months of darkness. In his delusions, he forgets his name, he forgets he is king, and most heartbreakingly, he forgets his wife and children, running from them in terror. One of his most persistent and poetic delusions is that he is made of glass. He refuses to let anyone touch him, terrified that he will shatter into 1,000 pieces. He has iron rods sewn into his clothes to prevent his fragile glass ribs from breaking if he bumps into a wall. Imagine the loneliness of such an existence, to be the most powerful man in the kingdom, yet too terrified to be hugged by your own children, living in a constant crystalline state of fragility. The court tiptoes around him, a silent dance of pity and fear. When the king is absent, in his mind, a power vacuum opens up, black and swirling, and nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. Into this empty space step the wolves, the king's brother, Louis of Orléans, and his cousin, John the Fearless, the Duke of Burgundy. These two men despise each other with a passion that transcends mere political rivalry. Louis is elegant, dissolute, a lover of luxury who is rumoured to be sleeping with the Queen. John is dour, ambitious, and beloved by the common people of Paris for his rough populist appeal. Their feud splits France down the middle. You are either an Armagnac, supporting Orléans, or a Burgundian. It is a civil war fought not on battlefields, but in dark alleyways and council chambers. The tension finally snaps on a cold November night in 1407. Louis of Orléans is riding home through the streets of Paris after visiting the Queen. He is humming a tune, playing with his glove, when a band of masked men rushes out from the shadows. They drag him from his mule and hack him to death in the muddy street. It is a brutal, mob-style hit. The leader of the assassins orders a torch to be brought close to the ruin of the face to confirm the identity. "It is him," he says. "Let us go." The order came from John the Fearless. The king, in his glass delusion, is powerless to punish the murderer. France is effectively decapitated, its nobility tearing each other's throats out while the English watch from across the Channel with renewed interest. Meanwhile, in England, the script is equally dramatic, though less psychological. King Richard II, the boy who faced down the peasants, has grown into a capricious and tyrannical adult. He believes in the absolute divinity of his rule, a dangerous philosophy when your nobles own private armies. He exiles his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, and steals his inheritance. It is a fatal mistake. Bolingbroke returns in 1699, not just to claim his lands, but to claim the throne. Richard, abandoned by his supporters, is forced to abdicate, a polite word for being stripped of his crown and locked in a tower. He dies soon after in Pontefract Castle, likely starved to death. A cruel irony for a man who loved fine dining. His last meal was air. Bolingbroke is crowned King Henry XII, but a crown taken by force sits uneasy on the head. His reign is a restless nightmare of rebellions, assassination attempts, and a gnawing guilt that manifests as a debilitating skin disease, perhaps leprosy, perhaps psoriasis, that rots him while he lives. He spends his reign fighting to keep what he stole, too busy with his own survival to look toward France. But Henry IV has a son, a young man named Henry of Monmouth. We know him from Shakespeare as Prince Hal, the wayward youth who spends his time drinking in taverns with the fat knight Falstaff. While the historical truth is less boozy, he was actually a precocious and grimly serious administrator involved in government from a young age. The legend captures a spiritual truth. He is a man waiting for his moment, a coiled spring. He fights for his father against Welsh rebels, taking an arrow in the face at the Battle of Shrewsbury. The arrow strikes him below the eye and lodges 6 inches deep in his skull. The royal surgeon invents a special tool, a screw-like extractor, to wind into the hollow shaft of the arrowhead and pull it out. The operation is performed without anesthesia, save perhaps for a gulp of wine and a piece of leather to bite on. Hal survives. The pain forges him. He emerges from the sickbed with a scar on his face and a cold iron will in his soul. As the 15th century dawns, the lull is coming to an end. The tournament tents are being packed away. The lances are being sharpened, not for sport, but for war. In France, the madness of the Glass King has left the door wide open. In England, the old usurper Henry IV finally dies in 1413, gasping out his last breath in the Jerusalem chamber of Westminster Abbey. His son stands over him, taking the crown. Henry IV is young, pious, austere, and frighteningly ambitious. He looks across the Channel and sees a divided France, a broken king, and a destiny that has been waiting for him since Crécy. He does not want a truce. He does not want a joust. He wants it all. The time for soft diplomacy is over. The time for the wolf has come. The summer of 1415 opens not with the warm embrace of the sun, but with the cold steel of ambition. King Henry V has gathered his fleet at Southampton, on 1,500 ships, a wooden armada bobbing on the grey waters of the Solent. It is an invasion force designed to send a singular message. The English are back, and this time they are not just raiding, they are staying. On August 14th, the fleet lands at the mouth of the Seine, near the town of Harfleur. The soldiers leap into the surf, full of bravado and beef, expecting a quick campaign of glory. But Harfleur is not a welcoming gate, it is a locked door. The town is surrounded by thick walls and marshes, and its defenders are stubborn. Henry lays siege to the city, bringing up his massive cannons, guns with names like the King's Daughter and the Messenger, to hammer the walls. But while the walls crack, something else begins to break. The English army's gut. The heat of late summer, combined with the stagnant water of the marshes and the sewage of the camp, breeds a killer far more efficient than any French knight. Dysentery, the bloody flux. It sweeps through the English lines with humiliating speed. Men who dreamed of dying by the sword find themselves dying in the latrines, their strength draining away in a fevered, undignified mess. It is the unglamorous reality of medieval warfare, where bacteria kill more men than battles do. By the time Harfleur finally surrenders in late September, the English army is a shadow of its former self. A third of the men are dead or invalided home. The season for campaigning is over. The autumn rains are beginning to fall, turning the roads to glue. The sensible, prudent decision would be to garrison Harfleur, sail home to England, and return next spring. Henry's counsel urges him to do exactly this, but Henry is not in a prudent mood. He is possessed by a cold, terrifying certainty that God is on his side, and he needs to prove it. He announces that he will march his depleted, sick army overland to the English stronghold of Calais, a journey of some 150 miles through hostile territory. It is a decision that borders on madness, a march of defiance designed to show the French that he can walk through their kingdom whenever he pleases. He strips the army down to the essentials. No heavy baggage, no wagons of luxury. Every man carries his own food for 8 days. They are not an invading conqueror's parade anymore. They are a band of desperate travellers, walking into the teeth of the storm. The march begins on October 8th. At first, they move with discipline, but the French countryside is turned against them. The bridges over the river Somme, the same river his great-grandfather Edward III crossed before Crécy, are broken or heavily guarded. The French have adopted a scorched earth policy, stripping the fields of grain and driving the cattle away. The English are marching on empty stomachs, chewing on dried nuts and berries, their boots rotting in the mud. And it rains. It rains with a relentless biblical persistency, a cold soaking downpour that seeps into the bones and rusts the mail. The flux is still with them, and many archers are so weak they have to stagger along, using their bows as walking sticks, their breeches cut away to allow them to relieve themselves without stopping. It is a grim-smelling, miserable procession, a far cry from the glittering pageant of chivalry. Shadowing them, just out of sight over the rolling hills, is the French army. It is gathering strength like a rolling snowball. The call has gone out across France. The English are trapped. Come and destroy them. The French nobility, forgetting the lessons of the past, are flocking to the banner of the Constable of France, Charles d'Albret. They are fresh, they are well fed, and they are overwhelmingly numerous. They mirror the English march, moving parallel to them on the other side of the river, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It is a high-stakes game of cat and mouse played out over 100 miles of wet terrain. Henry pushes his men hard, forcing them to march up to 18 miles a day, a grueling pace for healthy men, let alone sick ones. He is looking for a crossing, a ford, a gap in the French wall. Finally, near the village of Voyenne, they find 2 unguarded causeways across the marshy Somme. In a feat of logistical brilliance, the English slip across the river before the French can stop them. They are now on the same side as the enemy. The confrontation is inevitable. As they turn north towards Calais, the landscape begins to feel oppressive, closing in around them. The scouts report seeing thousands of campfires in the distance, a galaxy of enemy lights against the dark horizon. On October 24th, the English crest a ridge near the village of Maisoncelles, and see the truth. The French army is blocking the road to Calais. They are spread out across a narrow plateau between the woods of Agincourt and Agincourt. The sheer size of the French host is staggering. Historians still argue fiercely about the numbers here. Was it 12,000 French against 6,000 English, or perhaps 30,000 against 6,000? Modern estimates tend to be more conservative than the wild exaggerations of the chroniclers, who claimed up to 100,000 French. But even the lowest estimates agree on one thing: the English are outnumbered at least 2 to 1, and probably much more. And the quality of the troops is vastly different. The French are the flower of nobility in heavy plate armour. The English are a tired, sick, ragged band of archers and men-at-arms who haven't had a proper meal in 2 weeks. Night falls. It is the eve of St. Crispin. The two armies settle down within earshot of each other. The contrast between the camps is haunting. In the French lines there is noise, laughter, the sound of gambling, and the confident boasts of men who believe the victory is already won. Some accounts say they are already playing dice for the ransom of the English king. They paint a picture of arrogance, perhaps, but also of relief. They have finally cornered the wolf. In the English camp, there is silence. Henry has ordered that any man who makes a noise will lose his horse or his right ear. It is a discipline born of fear and focus. The men are cleaning their weapons, confessing their sins to the priests, and making their peace with God. It is said that the silence was so profound that the English could hear the French calling out to their servants in the dark. The rain continues to fall, turning the ploughland between the two armies into a quagmire of deep, sucking clay. This mud, a heavy, sticky soup typical of the Pas-de-Calais region, will play a role as significant as any general. Henry moves among his men. He does not offer them gold or land, he offers them brotherhood. When a knight, Sir Walter Hungerford, wishes aloud for 10,000 more brave archers from England, Henry rebukes him. "I would not have a single man more," the king says. "If God gives us the victory, it will be plain that we owe it to his grace. If not, the fewer we are, the less loss for England." It is a sentiment that Shakespeare would later polish into gold, but the raw historical metal is just as strong. He is telling them that they are alone, and that is exactly how it must be. They are not fighting for conquest anymore. They are fighting for survival. As the first grey light of dawn touches the wet fields on October 25th, 1415, the Englishmen stand up from the muddy ground. They are stiff, cold, and hungry. They look across the field, a distance of about 1,000 yards, and see the French army deployed in 3 massive lines, a wall of steel blocking the way home. The English archers hammer their stakes, 6-foot poles sharpened at both ends, into the ground in front of them, angling the points toward the enemy. It is a primitive defence, a wooden hedge against the iron tide. They strip off their shirts and doublets, ostensibly to move more freely, but perhaps also because the dysentery has made clothes a burden. They stand half naked in the cold morning air, shivering not just from the chill, but from the adrenaline of imminent death. The king takes his position in the centre, the golden crown upon his helmet shining even under the overcast sky. He raises his baton. The trap is set. The history of Europe is holding its breath. For 4 agonizing hours, nothing happens. The two armies stand facing each other across the ploughland, frozen in a tableau of tension. The French, perhaps remembering the disasters of the past, are content to wait. They know the English are starving. They know that every hour that passes weakens the invaders. Why fight when hunger will do the killing for you? Henry realizes this. He knows he cannot stand there until nightfall. He must force the issue. He must provoke the giant. And so, he gives an order that defies all military logic. "Banners advance," he cries. The English army, the smaller, weaker force, uproots their protective stakes and begins to march toward the enemy. It is a moment of supreme vulnerability. If the French cavalry charges now, while the archers are moving, without their wooden wall, the English will be trampled into the mud in minutes, but the French commanders are paralysed by their own chaotic command structure. They watch, puzzled, as the English trudge forward, halting just within the extreme range of the longbow, about 300 yards. The archers plant their stakes again, hammering them into the soft earth. The wall is rebuilt. The trap is reset closer now. Then the signal is given. A single shout ripples down the line. Knock! Draw! Loose! The first volley flies. It is not a killing volley. It is a teasing slap. The arrows patter against the French armour, rattling off helmets and breastplates. It is not the damage that matters, but the insult. The French chivalry can take a lot of things, but they cannot take being shot at by peasants while standing still. The discipline of the French vanguard snaps. The cavalry on the flanks, led by men eager for glory, spur their horses forward. Montjoie, Saint-Denis! The cry goes up, and the earth begins to shake. But the field of Agincourt is a traitor. The heavy rain has turned the clay soil into a deep, sucking mire. As the horses gather speed, their hooves sink deep, churning the ground into a sticky porridge. The charge, which should be a thunderbolt, becomes a slow-motion struggle. And then the storm breaks. The English archers, now finding their rhythm, unleash the full weight of their warbows. The arrows, heavy bodkin points, strike the horses with terrifying force. Maddened by pain, the animals rear and bolt, crashing into each other, throwing their riders into the mud. The cavalry charge collapses before it even reaches the stakes, but the horror is only beginning. The main body of the French army, thousands of dismounted men-at-arms in full-plate armour, is now marching forward. They are walking into the wreckage of their own cavalry. They have to step over dead horses and writhing men, breaking their formation. The mud sucks at their sabatons, weighing them down. They are tired before they even swing a sword, their breath rasping in their helmets. As they press forward, the terrain works against them. The woods on either side of the battlefield funnel the massive French army inward. The front ranks try to stop as they meet the English men-at-arms, but the ranks behind them, blind to what is happening, keep pushing forward. The pressure builds. It becomes a crush. Men are pressed so tightly together that they cannot lift their arms to strike. They are locked in a metallic embrace of death. Panic sets in. Those who lose their footing and fall into the mud cannot get up. They are trampled by their own comrades, pressed down into the suffocating clay. Historians now believe that the majority of the French dead at Agincourt did not die from arrow wounds or sword cuts, but from suffocation. It is a gruesome, claustrophobic way to die, crushed inside your own expensive armour, drowning in mud and the bodies of your friends, while the air is squeezed from your lungs. The English, seeing the French immobilized by the crush, change their tactics. The archers, having exhausted their arrows, drop their bows. They pick up whatever is at hand, swords, axes, and the heavy lead-weighted mallets they use to drive the stakes. They are unarmoured, light on their feet. They swarm over the heaps of struggling French knights like hornets attacking a trapped beetle. They are agile in the mud, where the knights are clumsy. They strike at the visors, the joints, the weak points. It is not a battle of finesse, it is a butchery. The French, terrified and exhausted, begin to surrender in droves, but there are too many of them. The pile of bodies, the wall of the dead, grows so high in places that the English fight from atop it, hacking down at the enemy. In the centre of the line, King Henry fights like a man possessed. He is not a general watching from a hill. He is in the mêlée, standing over the body of his wounded brother, Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, defending him against a wave of attackers. The French Duke of Alençon manages to strike Henry's helmet, shearing off a piece of his gold crown. before being cut down by the king's bodyguard. It is a moment that underscores the razor-thin margin between victory and death. If that blow had been an inch lower, history would have been rewritten. The battle lasts perhaps 3 hours. By the afternoon, the fighting has died down to sporadic skirmishes. The field is a scene of utter devastation. The English have won, but the victory is precarious. They have taken thousands of prisoners, more prisoners, in fact, than they have soldiers. The captives, fully armoured, and realising they still outnumber their captors, begin to look around. A rumour spreads that a fresh French force is attacking the baggage train in the rear. Henry, fearing that the prisoners will pick up weapons and attack his men from behind, makes a decision that is still debated by ethicists and historians. He orders the prisoners to be killed. The English knights refuse. It is against the code of chivalry and a terrible financial loss of ransom money. So Henry orders a squad of archers, men with no titles to lose, to do the work. It is a grim, bloody business, a cold-blooded execution in the mud. Hundreds of French nobles are slaughtered before the order is countermanded, when it becomes clear the new attack is a false alarm. It is the darkest stain on the golden legend of Agincourt, a reminder that survival often trumps honour. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the heaps of dead, a French herald, Montjoy, rides out to the English king. He is trembling. "The day is yours," he admits. Henry asks the name of the castle that stands nearby. "Agincourt," the herald replies. "Then," says the king, "let this battle be known as the Battle of Agincourt." The exhausted English lean on their spears, looking at the carnage. They have lost perhaps a few hundred men. The French have lost thousands, dukes, counts, the Constable of France, the flower of a generation, all churned into the bloody mud. The impossible has happened. The band of brothers has shattered the might of France. But as the adrenaline fades, the cold reality sets in. They are still in enemy territory, they are still sick, and the smell of death is rising from the field. The victory is absolute, but the war is far from over. The ghosts of the suffocated dead seem to linger in the mist, a silent chorus witnessing the brutality of miracles. The silence that settles over the field of Agincourt on the evening of October 25th, 1415, is not the peaceful silence of sleep, but the stunned, heavy silence of a cathedral after the roof has collapsed. The shouting has stopped. The clash of steel on steel, which had rung like a devil's anvil for hours, has faded into the damp twilight. Now, the only sounds are the low moans of the wounded, the wet suck of boots pulling out of the mud, and the soft, efficient rustle of the looters. They move through the mist like carrion birds in human shape, archers, camp followers, and local peasants, stripping the dead of everything that holds value. A knight who fell in armour worth a manor house is left naked in the freezing mud, his dignity stripped away along with his steel. It is a grim economic reality. On this field lies a fortune in gold chains, jewelled rings, and high-quality weapons, a windfall for men who have known only poverty. The victors walk among the mounds of the fallen, not with triumph, but with a kind of numb disbelief. They step over the bodies of men who were the celebrities of their age, the Dukes of Alençon, Brabant, and Bar, now reduced to indistinguishable heaps of bloody meat. The heralds, the accountants of death, move with their wax tablets, turning over faces, checking coats of arms, trying to tally the cost of the day. They will count over 8,000 French dead, including a staggering number of the high nobility. The English dead number in the hundreds. The disparity is so vast it feels less like a battle and more like a judgment of God. King Henry, still wearing his battered armour, orders the clergy to sing the Te Deum, a non nobis Domine, not unto us, O Lord, but unto thy name give glory. The soldiers kneel in the mire, their voices rough and cracking with exhaustion, singing a hymn of thanksgiving amidst the carnage. It is a haunting moment of piety in hell, but there is no time to linger. The air is already beginning to rot. The English army is still sick, still starving, and still deep in enemy territories. The victory at Agincourt has opened the road to Calais, but it has not shortened the miles. The next morning, they leave the dead to be buried in mass graves by the locals and resume their march. It is a slow, limping procession. The men are weighed down now not just by their weapons, but by the spoils of war. Every archer seems to be carrying a helmet, a sword, or a bundle of silk taken from the French baggage train. They reach Calais on October 29th, but even here, relief is bittersweet. The English garrison at Calais, overwhelmed by the sudden arrival of thousands of hungry men, refuses to open the gates to the common soldiers, fearing a food shortage. The heroes of Agincourt are forced to camp outside the walls, buying bread at extortionate prices from the very countrymen they just fought to defend. It is a final, cynical lesson in the economics of war. The crossing back to England is a nightmare of its own. The Channel, as if angry at being cheated of its due during the invasion, whips up a ferocious storm. The ships toss and heave, and the knights, so brave on the battlefield, are reduced to wretched seasickness. French prisoners, crammed into the holds, wonder if God has saved them from the arrows only to drown them in the dark. But they survive. When the fleet finally sights the white cliffs of Dover, the relief is so profound that some men supposedly weep. The reception in London on November 23rd is a spectacle that rivals the Roman triumphs of old. The city is hung with tapestries. Fountains run with wine. Towers are built along the route, filled with choirs of children singing Deo gratias Anglia. The crowd presses in, eager to touch the hem of the king's cloak to see the man who humbled France. But Henry, in a masterstroke of political theatre, or perhaps genuine humility, refuses to let the pageant become about him. He wears a simple gown of purple velvet. He rides a quiet horse. Most notably, he refuses to have his battle-damaged helmet, or with the piece of the gold crown sheared off, carried before him. He wants the people to look at God, not him. By making himself a vessel of divine will, he becomes untouchable. He is no longer just a king. He is a biblical figure, a David who slew Goliath. Yet, as the wine flows and the bells ring, a quiet question lingers in the minds of the thoughtful. What has actually changed? The French king is still on his throne. The English do not hold a single acre more of land than they did before the campaign, except for the port of Harfleur. Agincourt was a raid, a punitive expedition, not a conquest. The victory is a dazzling diamond, but you cannot eat a diamond. The war is not over. In fact, Agincourt has ensured it will last for another generation. By destroying the French moderate faction, Henry has left a power vacuum that will be filled by extremists and bitter vendettas. He has humiliated a proud nation that will now nurse a deep, festering desire for revenge. The victory has also intoxicated the English Parliament. Before Agincourt, they were reluctant to fund the war. Now they open the national purse wide. They want more. They want the crown of France. The victory has raised the stakes to an all-or-nothing gamble, and so the aftermath of glory is not peace, but preparation. Henry knows that a raid is not enough. To claim the French throne, he must do the hard, grinding work of occupations. He must capture the towns, garrison the castles, and administer the law. In 1417 he returns to France, but this time the mood is different. There is no dash for Calais. This is a cold, methodical invasion. He lands in Normandy and begins to swallow the duchy bite by bite. Caen, Falaise, Rouen, the great cities fall one by one. The siege of Rouen in 1419 is particularly brutal. Henry surrounds the city, digging trenches and building fortified camps. He starves it. The citizens, desperate, expel the useless mouths, 12,000 old men, women and children, hoping Henry will let them pass. But Henry, remembering the hard lessons of war, refuses. He keeps them trapped in the ditch between the walls and his lines. They eat grass, they eat the mud, and they die in the freezing rain while the English watch. It is the dark echo of the siege of Calais 70 years earlier, but this time there is no Queen Philippa to beg for mercy. Henry the Fifth is a harder man than his great-grandfather. He believes he is the scourge of God, sent to punish France for its sins. When a clergyman begs him to show charity, Henry replies, "War without fire is like sausages without mustard." It is a chillingly domestic metaphor for atrocities. The fall of Rouen breaks the back of Norman resistance. The road to Paris is open. The French government, paralysed by the madness of King Charles VI and the civil war between the Burgundians and the Armagnacs, finally collapses. The Duke of Burgundy, John the Fearless, desperate to stop the English, agrees to meet the Dauphin, the future Charles VII, on a bridge at Montereau to negotiate an alliance. But the hatred runs too deep. As they meet in the middle of the bridge, the Dauphin's men attack. John the Fearless is hacked to death, his hand cut off, the same hand that had ordered the murder of the Duke of Orléans years before. It is a cycle of blood that refuses to close. The new Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good, consumed by rage at his father's murder, does the unthinkable. He allies with the English. He invites Henry V to take the throne. The murder on the bridge hands France to England on a platter. The glorious dead of Agincourt have been avenged, not by arrows, but by the treachery of Frenchmen against Frenchmen. The path is cleared for the most ambitious treaty in medieval history, a piece of paper that will try to stitch two great nations into one, using a wedding ring as the needle. The cathedral city of Troyes, in the Champagne region of France, is usually a place of bubbling commerce, famous for its fairs and the precise weight of silver that gave us the term Troy ounce. But in May 1420, it is the stage for a political wedding that attempts to rewrite the map of Europe with a quill pen. The atmosphere is thick with a strange cocktail of exhaustion, relief, and profound humiliation. Inside the cathedral of Saint-Pierre, the air is cool and smells of incense and damp stone. King Henry V of England stands at the altar. He is 33 years old, at the absolute zenith of his power. He is lean, his face sharp and scarred, a man who looks like he has been carved from oak and weathered by salt spray. Opposite him stands not a warrior, but a ghost. King Charles VI of France, the Mad King, is present, but his mind is wandering somewhere far away, perhaps chasing butterflies in a garden that exists only in his head. He smiles vacantly, a hollow shell of a monarch, dressed in robes that seem too heavy for his trembling shoulders. Between them stands Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, Charles's wife, a woman whom French history has painted as a villainess, the she-wolf who sold her son's birthright, but who, in reality, was likely a desperate pragmatist trying to salvage a crumbling kingdom from total anarchy. The document they are gathered to sign is the Treaty of Troyes. It is a breathtaking piece of diplomacy. It declares that Henry V is now the regent of France and the heir to the French throne. When the fragile Charles VI finally dies, Henry will wear both crowns. The two great kingdoms will be united forever under a dual monarchy. To seal this pact, Henry is to marry Charles's daughter, the Princess Catherine of Valois. It is the ultimate victory. Henry has achieved what his ancestors, Edward III, the Black Prince, could only dream of. He has won the war without needing to besiege Paris. He has simply married it. The wedding itself, held on June 2nd, is a curious affair. Catherine is young, beautiful, and by all accounts terrified. She is the prize in a game she did not choose to play. Henry, for his part, seems genuinely smitten, or at least as smitten as a man like him can be. He is a soldier first, a lover second. There is a touch of grim humour in the fact that their honeymoon is not spent in a pastoral idyll, but at a siege. Just 2 days after the wedding, Henry kisses his new bride, puts his armour back on, and rides off to capture the town of Sens. "I must prosecute the war," he reportedly tells her, "for it is my trade." One can imagine Catherine's sigh. Nothing says, "I love you," quite like leaving your bride to go dodge crossbow bolts in a muddy ditch. It is the medieval equivalent of checking work emails during dinner, only with more catapults. But while the ink dries on the treaty, a shadow hangs over the celebrations. The treaty has a fatal flaw. It disinherits the Dauphin, Charles, the future Charles VII. He is declared a bastard, a criminal, and an enemy of the state. He has fled south of the Loire River, establishing a rival court at Bourges. He is a man of melancholy temperament, physically weak, prone to doubt, and lacking money. The English mockingly call him the King of Bourges. Yet, as long as he lives and breathes, the Treaty of Troyes is just a piece of paper. Henry the Fiaf knows this. He knows that he must crush the Dauphin to make the Union real. And so the war does not end. It merely shifts location. For 2 years, Henry campaigns with a ferocious intensity. He is everywhere, capturing towns, organising supplies, dictating letters. He is a machine of kingship, but machines wear out. In the winter of 1421, during the siege of Meaux, the English army is struck again by dysentery. The king, who has shared every hardship with his men, sleeping on the hard ground and drinking bad water, falls ill. He ignores it at first, riding in a litter when he can no longer sit a horse, willing his body to obey his iron mind. But the bacteria of the 15th century do not care about royal willpower. By August 1422, the conqueror of Agincourt is dying. He is taken to the Château de Vincennes, just outside Paris. The end comes quickly. He is 35 years old. As he lies on his deathbed, his thoughts are not of fear, but of unfinished business. He names his brother, the Duke of Bedford, as regent of France, and gives strict instructions on how to protect his infant son, born just months earlier. On August 31st, Henry the Satif dies. It is a shock that reverberates through Europe like a thunderclap. The man who was supposed to rule the world is gone, and then history delivers a punchline of exquisite cruelty. Less than 2 months later, in October 1422, the mad king Charles VI also dies. If Henry had lived just 8 weeks longer, he would have been crowned King of France in Notre Dame. He missed his destiny by a heartbeat. Instead, the crowns of England and France devolve upon a baby. Henry VI is 9 months old. He is the only king in history to be crowned king of both England and France, but he is an infant who cannot even hold a rattle, let alone a sceptre. The funeral procession of Henry V is a sombre, magnificent journey back to England. His body is boiled to separate the flesh from the bone, a grim necessity to preserve the remains for the long trip, and his bones are placed in a lead coffin. The procession travels through the French countryside he conquered, surrounded by weeping knights and black-clad priests. In London, he is buried in Westminster Abbey with a pomp that masks a deep, terrifying anxiety. The English people know that woe to the land whose king is a child. The strong hand is gone, and in its place is a regency council of quarrelling uncles. Meanwhile, in France, the death of the mad king changes the emotional landscape. Charles VI, despite his illness and the chaos of his reign, was strangely loved by his people. They pitied him. His funeral is attended by crowds who weep openly, crying out "Noel" as his coffin passes, a traditional salute to the king, but also a cry for hope in a dark winter. With both kings dead, the Treaty of Troyes feels suddenly fragile. The dual monarchy is technically in effect, with the English Duke of Bedford ruling efficiently from Paris in the name of his baby nephew. But down in the south, the disinherited Dauphin is watching. He is still weak, still broke, and still unsure of himself. Historians often debate the psychological state of the Dauphin during these years. Was he paralysed by depression, or was he shrewdly waiting for his enemies to overextend themselves? He wanders from castle to castle, unable to afford new clothes for his wife, looking less like a king and more like a sad, forgotten guest at a party that ended hours ago. But the Dauphin has one advantage that money cannot buy. He is French. The English, for all their efficiency, are occupiers. They speak a different language. They impose harsh taxes. They are goddams, a nickname given by the French due to the English soldiers' favourite curse word. The Treaty of Troyes tried to graft an English branch onto a French tree, but the graft is not taking. The immune system of France is beginning to reject the transplant. The war has lost its clear narrative. It is no longer a clash of two great kings. It is a messy, grinding struggle for legitimacy. The English hold the north and the capital. The Valois hold the south. The country is cut in two by the River Loire. It is a stalemate that seems destined to drag on forever. In the midst of this gloom, a strange rumour begins to circulate in the villages of Lorraine, on the far eastern edge of the kingdom. It is a whisper about a prophecy. Merlin, the ancient wizard, is said to have foretold that France would be lost by a woman and saved by a maiden. The people look at Queen Isabeau, the woman who signed the Treaty of Troyes, and nod. She is the woman who lost France. But who is the maiden? The idea seems absurd. A girl saving the kingdom? In a world where women are barred from the throne by Salic law and barred from the battlefield by custom, it is a fantasy. And yet in the village of Domremy, a 13-year-old peasant girl is beginning to hear voices in the sound of the church bells. She is not thinking of treaties or crowns. She is thinking of her garden, her sheep, and the strange, luminous figures that have started to appear to her near the fairy tree on the edge of the woods. The Mad King is dead, the Warrior King is dead, and the stage is being cleared for the most unlikely player of them all. The age of chivalry is ending, the age of miracles is about to begin. We must now narrow our focus, zooming in from the grand maps of generals to a small, dusty patch of earth in the village of Domremy. It is the summer of 1424, or perhaps 1425. Dates in the lives of the poor are rarely written in stone. Domremy sits on the ragged edge of the kingdom, in the borderlands between France and the Holy Roman Empire. It is a place where the war is not a daily battle, but a periodic terror. Soldiers from both sides occasionally sweep through like hail, burning a barn or stealing cattle before moving on. In this village lives a girl named Jaggedly Jeanne, or as history will polish her name, Joan. She is not a princess in a tower. She is a peasant, the daughter of a prosperous farmer, Jacques d'Arc. She does not know how to read or write. Her hands are rough from spinning wool and working in the fields. She is intensely pious, the kind of girl who kneels in the church so long that other children tease her for it. There is nothing about her that suggests a warrior. She is afraid of the soldiers. She is, by all observable metrics, ordinary. But one summer day, at noon, in her father's garden, the ordinary breaks. Joan is about 13 years old. She later testifies that she saw a bright light from the direction of the church and heard a voice. It was a voice of terror and beauty. At first, she thinks she is dreaming. But the voice returns, again and again. She identifies the speaker as Saint Michael the Archangel, the commander of the heavenly hosts, soon joined by Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret, Their message is not a vague call to piety. It is a specific, impossible set of military orders. They tell her she must go to the Dauphin, Charles. She must lift the siege of Orléans. She must lead the Dauphin to Reims to be crowned. Joan, understandably, argues with the angels. I am a poor girl, she weeps, who knows not how to ride or lead men of war. The voices are unrelenting. They tell her that God will help thee. For 4 years, she keeps this secret, a burning coal in her chest, while she continues to spin wool and watch the sheep. Imagine the psychological burden on a teenager carrying the fate of a nation in her head while trying to avoid scolding for not finishing her chores. In May 1428, the voices become urgent. The English are moving on to Orléans. If Orléans falls, the south falls, and France is finished. Joan can no longer stay in the garden. She manoeuvres a visit to a relative in the nearby town of Vaucouleurs, where a French garrison commander, Robert de Baudricourt, is stationed. Baudricourt is a hardened, cynical soldier, a man who deals in iron and blood, not visions. When this teenage girl in a red dress walks into his hall and announces that the King of Heaven has sent her to save France, he looks at her with a mixture of amusement and irritation. He tells her cousin, take her home to her father and box her ears. It is the reaction of the real world colliding with the mystical. Joan is sent away. But she does not go home. She stays in the town praying, speaking to the people. Her conviction is so absolute, so radiant, that it begins to infect the villagers. They stop seeing a crazy girl and start seeing something else, a hope. She returns to Baudricourt in early 1429. This time, she tells him a piece of news before it could possibly have arrived by horsemen. She claims the French have suffered a grave defeat near Orléans, the Battle of the Herrings. When the official report arrives days later confirming her words, the skepticism of the old soldier cracks. He gives her a sword and an escort of 6 men. But before she leaves, a profound transformation occurs. Joan cuts her hair short, in the fashion of a bowl. She puts aside a dress and dons the tunic, hose, and boots of a man. This is not merely for protection against the lust of soldiers on the road, though that is a practical reason. It is a shedding of her old identity. The peasant girl is gone. The pucelle, the maid, is born. The journey to the Dauphin's court at Chinon takes 11 days. It is a ride through the heart of enemy territory. They sleep in the woods, wrapping themselves in cloaks against the February frost. Her companions, hardened soldiers like Jean de Metz, later admit they started the journey intending to perhaps rob or abandon her, but were won over by her purity and her indefatigable stamina. She does not ride like a peasant. She rides like she was born in the saddle. On March 6, 1429, they arrive at the grim fortress of Chinon, overlooking the Vienne River. The court is buzzing with rumours. The Dauphin Charles is desperate, broke, and paralysed by indecision. His advisers tell him to send the witch away, but he is a drowning man, and she is a lifeline. He agrees to see her. The meeting is a piece of legendary theatre. Charles decides to test her. He disguises himself in plain clothes and hides among the crowd of courtiers, while a noble is dressed in the king's robes and placed on the throne. The great hall is lit by torches, filled with hundreds of people. Joan enters. She has never seen a king, never seen a court. She ignores the man on the throne. She walks straight to the small, nondescript man in the corner. Charles, she kneels before him. God give you life, gentle king, she says. Charles tries to deny it, claiming he is not the king. Joan persists. In the name of God, it is you, and no other. A hush falls over the room. Charles, shaken, takes her aside. They speak in private for a few moments. Historians have spent centuries guessing what was said in that alcove. The most credible theory is that Joan revealed a secret that plagued Charles's soul, his doubt about his own legitimacy. Rumours had swirled for years that he was the product of his mother's affair. Joan likely told him that the voices had confirmed he was the true son of the king and the rightful heir. Charles returns to the room with his face glowing. He believes. But belief is not enough for the church. A girl claiming to speak for God could just as easily be speaking for the devil. Before she can be given an army, she must be tested. She is sent to Poitiers to be examined by a panel of theologians and lawyers. For weeks they grill her. They try to trap her with complex theological questions. When one professor, trying to mock her, asks what language her voices speak, she replies with a sharp peasant wit, "A better language than yours." The professor spoke with a heavy Limousin accent. When asked for a sign, she replies, "In the name of God, I have not come to Poitiers to show signs, but lead me to Orléans, and I will show you the sign for which I have been sent." They also subject her to a humiliating physical examination by a committee of matrons to prove her virginity, for it was widely believed that a witch, having consorted with demons, could not be a virgin. She passes every test. The report declares her to be a humble virgin possessed of goodness, humility, devotion, honesty, and simplicity. Charles has his answer. He gives her armour, a suit of white steel made to fit her small frame. He gives her a household, a stable of horses, and a banner painted with lilies and the image of God holding the world, but she lacks a sword. She tells the king that her sword is buried behind the altar of the church of Sainte Catherine de Fierbois. She has never been there, but she describes it perfectly. An ancient sword with 5 crosses on the blade. Monks are sent to dig. They find the sword, exactly as she described, covered in rust. When they wipe it, the rust falls away effortlessly. It is the final touch of the miraculous. In April 1429, Joan of Arc rides out of Blois at the head of an army. She is 17 years old. The soldiers, cynical veterans of a losing war, are stunned. She bans swearing. She bans camp followers and prostitutes. She forces the men to go to confession, and miraculously, they obey her. The rough captains, men like La Hire, who swore with every breath, find themselves swallowing their curses. They are no longer fighting for a feudal lord. They are fighting for a saint. The psychological shift is seismic. The French army has been asleep for a generation, trapped in a nightmare of defeat. Now, a girl with a banner has walked into the bedroom and thrown open the curtains. The sun is shining. The road leads to Orléans. The English are waiting, secure in their forts, mocking the cowgirl who thinks she can fight. They are about to learn that faith is a weapon far more dangerous than a longbow. The city of Orléans sits on the north bank of the Loire River, a stone island in a sea of war. For 6 months, the English have tightened their grip around its throat. They have built a ring of fortress towers known as Bastilles, encircling the city to choke off food and reinforcements. Inside the walls, the mood is one of slow, grinding despair. The citizens are eating little, sleeping less, and watching the horizon with the dull eyes of the doomed. But on the evening of April 29th, 1429, the horizon changes. A fleet of boats slips up the river, carrying supplies and a figure in white armour. Joan of Arc enters Orléans not as a conqueror, but as a deliverance. The scene is one of biblical intensity. Torches flare in the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the cathedral walls. The people press around her, weeping, trying to touch her stirrups, her horse, her boots. They are so desperate to be near her that a torch accidentally sets fire to her banner, which she deftly extinguishes with the spur of her horse. A moment of casual competence that sends a ripple of awe through the crowd. She's 17, tired from the road, but she rides with the spine of a queen. To the starving citizens, she's not a peasant girl. She's the Archangel Michael come down to earth. However, the military commanders of Orléans, led by the pragmatic Jean de Dunois, known as the Bastard of Orléans, are less impressed. To them, she is a mascot, a morale booster sent by the king to keep the citizens quiet while the professionals do the real work. Dunois welcomes her, but essentially pats her on the head and tells her to rest while he plans the strategy. He keeps the war council secret from her. He intends to play a waiting game to starve the English out, just as they are starving the French. But Joan has not come to wait. She has come to fight. The friction between the maid and the bastard is the friction between two worlds, the cautious chess-playing world of medieval warfare and the absolute burning certainty of divine will. Joan demands to attack. She dictates a letter to the English commanders, a document of breathtaking arrogance and simplicity. King of England, and you, Duke of Bedford, surrender to the maid. If you do not, I will make a war cry that will be remembered forever. The English response is laughter. They shout from their ramparts that she is a cowgirl and a whore of the Armagnacs, threatening to burn her if they catch her. The first spark ignites on May 4th. Joan is resting in her lodgings when she suddenly wakes up, agitated. "My voices tell me to go against the English," she cries. She hasn't been told that a skirmish has started near the English fort of Saint-Lô. She rushes out, grabs her banner and rides toward the sound of the guns. When she arrives, the French are retreating. Seeing her banner, the white linen snapping in the wind, the soldiers stop. Shame turns into resolve. They turn around. With Joan riding at the front, not fighting but leading, they storm the fort of Saint-Lô. It is a slaughter. The English garrison is overrun. For the first time in months, the bells of Orléans ring for a victory. The spell of English invincibility, that psychological armour forged at Agincourt, has a crack in it, but the decisive moment comes 3 days later, on May 7th. The target is Les Tourelles, the formidable twin-towered fortress that guards the southern end of the bridge across the Loire. It is the linchpin of the siege. If Les Tourelles falls, the English blockade is broken. The fighting begins at dawn. It is brutal, intimate violence, ladders thrown against stone walls, boiling oil, crossbow bolts singing like angry wasps. The English commander, William Glasdale, the man who had shouted the loudest insults at Joan, defends the walls with ferocious skill. The French assault wave after wave, but they are thrown back. The ditch is filled with broken ladders and broken men. Around noon, disaster strikes. Joan, standing near the base of the wall, holding her banner to rally the men, is hit. An English arrow, likely from a longbow or a crossbow, strikes her between the neck and the shoulder, plunging deep into the flesh. She falls. A roar of triumph goes up from the English walls. The witch is dead. The French morale collapses instantly. They carry her off the field. The commanders prepare to sound the retreat. The day is lost. But in the grass behind the lines, something extraordinary happens. A surgeon wants to charm the wound, but Joan refuses. She pulls the arrow out herself, or has it pulled. A moment of agonizing pain that would make a hardened veteran swoon. She weeps, a reminder that she is still just a teenage girl. But then she confesses to her chaplain, prays, and does the unthinkable. She puts her armour back on. She returns to the fight. When she appears out of the smoke, clutching her banner, the effect is supernatural. The English, who thought they had killed her, freeze. They see a figure that cannot be killed. Is she immortal? They whisper. Panic, cold and irrational, seeps into the English ranks. The French, seeing their saint returned from the dead, are possessed by a frenzy. They charge the walls with a force that defies physics. At the same time, the citizens of Orléans have bridged the broken spans of the bridge with timber planks. They attack Les Tourelles from the city side. The English are trapped. Glassdale, trying to retreat from the outer bulwark to the main towers, crosses a wooden drawbridge, but the bridge, set on fire by a barge sent downriver, collapses under the weight of his armour. He falls into the swirling waters of the Loire. Joan, seeing him fall, weeps for his soul, crying out, "Glassdale, Glassdale, yield to the King of Heaven. You called me whore, but I have great pity on your soul." He does not yield. He drowns, weighed down by the steel that was meant to protect him. Les Tourelles falls. The English army, leaderless and terrified, watches from the other bank. The sun sets on a French victory so absolute, it feels like a dream. But the war is not quite over. The next morning, Sunday, May 8th, the main English army under Lord Talbot marches out of their remaining forts and draws up in battle formation on the plain. They are challenging the French to an open field battle, their specialty. The French commanders want to attack. Joan rides out. She looks at the English line, then looks at her own men. "Do not attack them," she says. "It is the Sabbath. If they wish to go, let them go." She orders an altar to be set up in the field. The French army kneels and hears Mass, their backs to the enemy. It is a moment of supreme confidence. While the priest chants the liturgy, the English army stands there, confused. They cannot attack an army at prayer without looking like devils, and they cannot stay. The momentum is gone. Slowly, sullenly, the English turn, break formation, and march away. The silence that follows is louder than the cannons. The siege is over. The Maid of Orléans has done the impossible in 9 days. The bells of the city begin to ring. All of them, a cacophony of bronze that rolls over the river and the fields, announcing to the world that God has changed sides. Joan does not celebrate. She is exhausted, her wound is throbbing, and she retires to eat a few slices of bread dipped in wine and water. She has saved France, but she knows the hardest part is yet to come. The road to Rheims, deep in enemy territory, is long, and the king she serves is still a hesitant man who needs to be dragged toward his own crown. But for tonight, the moonlight shines on a free city, and the girl in white armour sleeps the sleep of the faithful. The bells of Orléans have barely stopped ringing when Joan of Arc turns her eyes to the map. The English have retreated, yes, but they have not vanished. They are regrouping in the towns along the Loire, Jargeau, Meung, Beaugency, like a wounded wolf licking its chops, waiting for the hunter to make a mistake. The professional commanders, the bastard Dunois and the Duke of Alençon, advise caution. They want to clear the river slowly, methodically, but Joan operates on a different timeline, a divine deadline. She insists they must march immediately to Rheims to crown the Dauphin. To the military mind, this is madness. Rheims lies deep in Burgundian territory, a journey of over 150 miles through hostile lands, studded with fortified towns loyal to the English. It is a suicide mission. But Joan is adamant. "I will last a year, and but little longer," she tells the king. "We must think of work." It is a chilling prophecy, a teenage girl measuring her life not in decades, but in months. So begins the Loire campaign, a week of lightning warfare that stuns the medieval world. The French army, energized by the miracle of Orléans, moves with a speed that defies the sluggish conventions of the age. They strike Jargeau on June 12th. Joan leads the assault, storming the walls with her banner in hand. A stone projectile crashes down on her helmet, knocking her off a ladder. She lies in the dirt for a heartbeat, then springs up, shouting, "Friends, friends, up, up!" Our Lord has condemned the English. The town falls. Meung falls. Beaugency falls. The English are reeling, unable to understand how the cowards of yesterday have become the lions of today. Then comes June 18th, 1429, the Battle of Poitiers. This is the moment the ghosts of Agincourt finally stop screaming. The English army, led by the famous John Talbot and Sir John Fastolf, is retreating north, trying to find a defensive position. They are masters of the set-piece battle. Give them time to plant their stakes and deploy their archers, and they are invincible. But the French, urged on by Joan, ride boldly, you will have good guidance. Do not give them time. They are hunting. The battle begins with a moment of bizarre, accidental comedy that turns into tragedy. The English rearguard is concealed in the woods, waiting to ambush the French. A stag, a wild deer, startled by the marching armies, bolts out of the forest and crashes through the English lines. The English archers, bored and perhaps forgetting their discipline, give a loud "Hallo," as if they were on a hunt. It is a fatal shout. The French scouts hear it. They pinpoint the enemy position. The element of surprise, the English weapon of choice for 80 years, is lost. The French heavy cavalry, led by La Hire and Poton de Saint-Traille, does not wait for the archers. They spur their horses and charge instantly. They catch the English archers before they can plant their stakes, before they can even nock their arrows. It is a massacre. The longbowmen, the terrifying executioners of Crécy and Poitiers, are cut down where they stand. Defenceless in their leather jerkins, Talbot is captured. Fastolf flees, earning a reputation for cowardice that Shakespeare will later unfairly immortalise. It is the mirror image of Agincourt. The myth of English invincibility is not just broken, it is shattered into 1,000 bloody pieces on the road to Poitiers. With the English field army destroyed, the road to Reims is technically open, but it is psychologically blocked. The town of Troyes stands in the way, the very city where the shameful treaty disinheriting the Dauphin was signed. It is garrisoned by Burgundians who have sworn to fight to the death. The French army arrives outside the walls, hungry and lacking siege engines. The Council of War begs the king to retreat. They cannot take a fortified city without cannons. Charles, always looking for an excuse to go home, agrees. But Joan knocks on the door of the council chamber. "Gentle King of France," she says, "if you will remain here before your town of Troyes, it shall be yours within 2 days, by love or by force." She marches out to the camp and begins to order the soldiers to gather wood. Faggots, bundles of sticks, old doors, anything that will burn. She lines up the cannons they do have. She creates the visual impression of an imminent apocalyptic assault. She is bluffing. She has no way to breach the walls. But the citizens of Troyes, looking over the ramparts, see the witch of the Armagnacs preparing to burn them alive. Their nerve breaks. The gates open. The city surrenders without a shot being fired. The bluff works. On July 16th, the Royal Army sights the towers of Reims Cathedral rising from the plains of Champagne. The city, deep in enemy territory, opens its gates and welcomes the king with cries of "Noel!" The coronation is set for the very next day, a Sunday. It is a hasty affair. There is no time to commission new robes or decorations. The cathedral is draped in old tapestries, found in the sacristy, but the essentials are there. The holy ampulla, the vial of sacred oil, said to have been brought by a dove for the baptism of Clovis, is brought from the Abbey of Saint-Rémy. Inside the cathedral, the light filters through the stained glass, painting the stone floor in pools of ruby and sapphire. The organ thunders. The smell of incense mixes with the sweat of soldiers who have marched hundreds of miles in summer heat. Charles VII stands before the altar. He is not a majestic figure. He is knobby-kneed, with a long nose and sad eyes. But as the Archbishop of Reims anoints him with the holy oil, on the head, the chest, the shoulders, a transformation occurs. He is no longer the king of Bourges. He is no longer the Dauphin. He is the anointed of the Lord, the rightful king of France. The doubts about his legitimacy are washed away by the chrism. Joan stands beside him, holding her banner. It is a striking image, the king in gold and velvet, the peasant girl in steel. She does not look at the crowd, she looks at the crown. When the crown is finally placed on Charles's head, Joan falls to her knees, weeping openly. "Gentle king," she sobs, embracing his knees. "Now is executed the pleasure of God, who wished that the siege of Orléans should be lifted, and that you should be brought to this city of Reims to receive your holy consecration, showing that you are the true king." In the crowd, an old man watches with tears in his eyes Jacques d'Arc, her father. The village council of Domremy has paid for his trip to see his daughter's triumph. It is a moment of supreme, aching humanity. The girl who left her garden has fulfilled her promise. But even as the Te Deum swells to the vaulted ceiling, there is a shadow in the corner of the cathedral. The king is crowned, yes, but he is already looking for a way out. He is tired of war. He is tired of this intense, demanding saint who pushes him constantly. He wants to negotiate. He wants a truce with the Duke of Burgundy. While Joan dreams of marching on Paris, Charles dreams of a soft bed and a quiet life. The seeds of betrayal are sown not in defeat, but in the very moment of victory. The coronation is the zenith of Joan's life. She has done what she said she would do. But the tragedy of prophets is that they are only useful until the prophecy is fulfilled. After that, they are dangerous. As the royal party leaves the cathedral, stepping out into the blinding July sun, the clock has already started ticking down toward the fire. The year and a little longer is halfway gone. The golden light of the coronation does not last. It fades into the grey autumnal drizzle of politics. We find ourselves now in the slow, heartbreaking slide from the altar to the stake. After Reims, the momentum of the miracle begins to stutter. Joan wants to march on Paris, to strike the heart of the English power while the iron is hot, but King Charles VII, the man she crowned, is hesitating. He is listening to his counsellors again, men who whisper that diplomacy is safer than battle, that truces are cheaper than armies. He drags his feet, signing pointless ceasefires with the Duke of Burgundy that only serve to give the English time to reinforce Paris. In September 1429, Joan finally forces an attack on the capital near the Saint-Honoré gate. But it is a disaster. She is wounded in the thigh by a crossbow bolt, left lying in the mud of the moat until nightfall, crying out for the troops to advance, but the king orders a retreat. It is the first time she has failed. The spell of invincibility is broken, and the court begins to turn away from her. She has become inconvenient, a loud, demanding conscience in a court that prefers the quiet compromise of corruption. By the spring of 1430, she is fighting small, scrappy skirmishes on the edges of the war, a general without a real army. On May 23rd, at the town of Compiègne, the trap snaps shut. She leads a sortie out of the gates to attack a Burgundian camp. It is a trap, or perhaps just bad luck. Enemy reinforcements swarm the field. Joan, fighting in the rearguard to protect her retreating men, is the last one outside. She rides for the drawbridge, but the governor of the town, out of fear or perhaps treachery, orders the gate raised. She's cut off. A Burgundian archer grabs her surcoat and pulls her from her horse. She hits the ground not as a saint, but as a prisoner of war. And then the silence from the French court becomes deafening. King Charles VII, the anointed one, the man who owes his crown entirely to her, does nothing. He does not offer a ransom. He does not threaten retaliation. He does not send an army. He simply lets her vanish, perhaps relieved that the problem has been solved. It is a betrayal so profound it chills the blood more than any dungeon. The Burgundians, who are allies of the English, hold her for months, waiting for a bid. Finally, the English pay 10,000 livres tournois, a king's ransom, to buy a peasant girl. They do not want to just kill her, they want to destroy her. To burn her as a witch is to prove that Charles's coronation was the work of the devil, delegitimizing the French monarchy forever. She is taken to Rouen, the headquarters of the English occupation in Normandy. Here, she's not treated as a noble prisoner. She's locked in a tower, in a dark cell, chained by the neck, hands and feet to a heavy log. Her guards are rough English soldiers who mock her, torment her, and deny her privacy, even in sleep. It is a systematic attempt to break her mind before they break her body. The trial begins in January 1431. It is not a trial, it is a piece of theatre, with a predetermined ending. The judge is Pierre Cauchon, the Bishop of Beauvais, a man whose ambition is matched only by his hatred of the maid. He packs the court with pro-English clerics. Joan has no lawyer, no counsel. She stands alone, an illiterate 19-year-old girl, facing the combined intellectual might of the University of Paris and the Inquisition. They throw questions at her like stones, trying to trap her in theological heresy. Do you know if you are in the grace of God? They ask. A trap. For to say yes is presumption, claiming to know God's mind, and to say no is a confession of sin. Her answer rings down through the centuries with diamond-like clarity. If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me. The judges are stunned. They adjourn the session, unable to find a flaw in her armour. For months, the cat-and-mouse game continues. They attack her for wearing men's clothes, claiming it is an abomination against Leviticus. She replies that she wears them for protection among the soldiers, and because her voices told her to. They ask about the nature of her visions, trying to prove they are demonic. She answers with a simple peasant piety that frustrates their complex Latin logic. But she is human, and she is exhausted. She is sick from the bad food and the damp stone. In late May, they take her to the cemetery of Saint-Ouen, show her the instruments of torture and point to a pyre. They tell her that if she does not recant, she will burn immediately. Terror, cold and primal, grips her. She is afraid of the fire. In a moment of panic, she signs a document of abjuration, admitting her voices were fake and agreeing to wear women's clothes. She is spared the fire, but sentenced to perpetual imprisonment on the bread of sorrow and the water of affliction. She puts on a dress. The English are furious. They wanted her dead, but the trap is not finished. 3 days later, the judges visit her cell and find her wearing men's clothes again. Why? Historians argue. Did the guards steal her dress? Did they try to rape her, forcing her to put on the tunic and hose for protection? Or did her voices return and rebuke her for her weakness? When asked, she says simply, "I have done it because it is more lawful and convenient for me to wear men's clothes, seeing that I am with men. It is enough." She is declared a relapsed heretic. The sentence is death. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, she is dressed in a long white shift. They place a paper mitre on her head with the words, "Heretic, relapsed, apostate, idolatress." She is led to the old market square in Rouen. It is crowded with soldiers and citizens. The stake is set high on a plaster platform, so the executioner cannot strangle her out of mercy before the flames reach her. A cruel detail ordered by the English Earl of Warwick. She asks for a cross. An English soldier, moved by pity, ties 2 sticks together and hands them to her. She kisses it and puts it in her bosom. A monk brings a crucifix from the church and holds it up before her eyes so she can see it above the smoke. As the fire is lit, the wood crackles and the heat begins to rise. She does not scream curses, she does not beg, she cries out the name of her saints. And then as the flames engulf her, she screams one word over and over, Jesus, Jesus! It is a cry that unnerves the executioners. The secretary to the King of England, John Tressart, turns away weeping. "We are lost," he murmurs, "for we have burned a saint." When the fire dies down, the English order the executioner to rake back the coals, to show the crowd her charred body, to prove she has not escaped. Then they burn her again, reducing her to ash. Legend says her heart remained intact, full of blood, refusing to burn, but the executioner, in a panic, throws everything, ash, bone and heart, into the River Seine. He wants no relics left. He wants to erase her from the earth. But as the grey ash swirls in the river current, drifting toward the sea, the opposite happens. By denying her a grave, they make the whole of France her monument. The witch is dead, but the martyr is born. The smoke from Rouen does not blow away. It hangs over the English cause like a curse. The war will go on for another 22 years, but the soul of the conflict has shifted. The English have won the trial, but they have lost the future. The girl from Domremy has gone into the fire, and in doing so she has lit a flame that no amount of rain or time will ever be able to put out. The ashes of Joan of Arc have long since drifted out to sea, and 19 years have passed since that terrible morning in Rouen. The calendar has turned to 1450. A child born on the day of Agincourt is now a man of 35, perhaps with grey in his beard and a weariness in his bones. The war has become a slow, grinding tectonic shift. The English occupation of France, once a vast empire of stone and law, is crumbling. The Duke of Burgundy, that essential ally who made English rule possible, has switched sides, realising that the wind has changed direction. He signed the Treaty of Arras with Charles VII, leaving the English isolated on their island of conquest. But the most profound change is not diplomatic, it is technological. King Charles VII, the man Joan dragged to his coronation, has finally grown into his crown. He has done something revolutionary. He has created the Compagnie d'Ordonnance, the first professional standing army in Western Europe since the fall of Rome. No longer does he rely on unruly feudal levies who go home when the harvest calls. These are paid soldiers, disciplined, uniformed, and crucially supported by a new breed of warfare. Enter the Bureau brothers, Jean and Gaspard. They are not knights in shining armour. They are lawyers and bureaucrats turned master gunners. They represent the cold future of war. Men who fight with mathematics, trajectory, and a black powder that smells of hellfire. They have forged a train of artillery that can knock down castle walls in days. Walls that used to hold out for months. The medieval world of high stone towers is becoming obsolete with every thunderclap of their bombards. In England, the situation is grim. The government is broke. The king, Henry VI, is gentle but weak-minded, and the people are tired. Yet pride is a stubborn thing. In a desperate attempt to save their holdings in Normandy, the English send a fresh army under Sir Thomas Kyriel. He lands at Cherbourg in March 1450 with about 4,000 men. Kyriel is a veteran of the old school. He remembers the glory days. He marches through the Cotentin Peninsula, relieving besieged garrisons, looking for a fight. He believes that if he can just draw the French into a traditional battle, the kind his grandfather fought, the longbow will win the day. He's bringing a 14th century playbook to a 15th century shootout. On April 14th, near the village of Formigny, he finds his spot. It is a classic English defensive position. A small valley with a brook at the back to protect the rear and a slope in front. The archers drive their sharpened stakes into the ground, creating the familiar hedgehog formation. They take off their boots to get a better grip on the grass. They wait. They expect the French to charge foolishly, just as they did at Crécy, Poitiers and Agincourt. They are ready to play their part in the old song. But the French commander, the Count of Clermont, has read a new script. He arrives with an army of roughly equal size, but he does not charge. He stops out of bowshot. He looks at the English stakes, those wooden teeth waiting to bite his horses, and he simply refuses to engage. Instead, he signals to the Bureau brothers. They wheel out 2 culverins, long, slender cannons mounted on wheeled carriages. These are not the clumsy, pot-bellied bombards of the past. They are mobile field guns. The French gunners adjust the elevation, light the slow matches, and wait for the fizz. Boom! A stone ball, or perhaps an iron one, smashes into the English lines, then another, and another. The English archers, standing ready with their bows drawn, are confused. They cannot shoot back. The cannons are out of range. They are being killed by math from a distance they cannot bridge. The psychological impact is devastating. A longbowman is trained to duel with men, not with machines. To stand there and be pounded into red paste without being able to return fire is intolerable. The discipline, usually the iron backbone of the English army, begins to fray. Kyriel realizes he cannot just stand there and let his men be dismantled. He has been baited. He orders his men to charge the guns. It is a moment of irony. The English, usually the defensive masters, are forced to become the attackers. The archers drop their bows, draw their swords and axes, and rush down the slope. They reach the French guns, killing the gunners and capturing the culverins. For a moment, it looks like the English might win. They have silenced the noise, but in doing so, they have left their fortified position. Their formation is broken, scattered across the field. They are no longer a hedgehog. They are just a crowd of angry men. And then the second hammer blow falls. On the horizon, a cloud of dust appears. It is the Constable of France, Arthur de Richemont, arriving from the south with a second French army of 1,200 heavy cavalry. He is marched to the sound of the guns. The English, disorganized and celebrating their capture of the cannons, are caught in the open. Richmont's cavalry charges. This time, there are no stakes to stop them. There are no volleys of arrows to break the charge. The French knights crash into the flank of the English army with the force of a tidal wave. It is not a battle, it is a liquidation. The English army is cut to pieces. Kyriel is captured. Nearly 4,000 English soldiers, the last hope of Normandy, are killed or taken prisoner. The Battle of Formigny is a small engagement compared to the massive slaughters of the past, but its significance is monumental. It proves that the longbow, the weapon that defined a century of warfare, has finally met its match. The arrow is fast, but the cannonball is faster, and more importantly, the cannon represents a shift in the social order. An archer needs a lifetime of training to build the muscle to draw a war bow. A gunner can be trained in weeks. War is becoming industrialized. The romance, if there ever really was any, is being replaced by chemical combustion. After Formigny, the English collapse in Normandy is total. The towns that Henry IV spent years starving into submission now surrender in days. Caen, Falaise, Cherbourg. They open their gates to the French king. The English garrisons march out, heads down, carrying their possessions in bundles, heading for the coast. The local population, who have lived under English rule for 30 years, often watch them go with a mix of relief and indifference. They are tired of the goddams. By August 1450, the entire Duchy of Normandy is French again. The English hold only Calais. The dream of a dual monarchy, of an English empire on the continent, has evaporated like morning mist. However, the war is not quite dead. There is one last act to play out. Down in the southwest, in the wine-rich region of Gascony, the people are not cheering the French successes. Gascony has been English for 300 years, ever since Eleanor of Aquitaine married Henry II. They speak a different dialect. They sell their wine to London, not Paris. They view the French army not as liberators, but as foreign invaders. In 1452, they send a secret message to England. Come back, we will open the gates. The old warrior, John Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, now nearly 70 years old, answers the call. He is the English Achilles, the last living legend of the age of chivalry. He lands in Bordeaux, and the city welcomes him with open arms. It seems, for a brief, flickering moment, that the clock has been turned back. Talbot recaptures the region. The French are stunned. King Charles VII, tired but determined, gathers his army one last time. He sends the Bureau brothers south. They bring with them not just a few culverins, but a massive train of artillery, hundreds of guns. They are going to Castillon. They are not going to fight a battle, they are going to build a killbox. Historians often debate where exactly the Middle Ages ends. Some say it is the fall of Constantinople in 1453, others say it is the discovery of the Americas in 1492, but a strong case can be made for a muddy field in France in the summer of 1453. As the sun sets on the era of knights and archers, a new sound is filling the air, a sharp, acrid smell of sulphur that stings the nose. It is the scent of the future. The old world is dying, not with a whimper, but with a bang. Talbot is polishing his armour. The Bureau brothers are checking their powder supplies. The stage is set for the final curtain call, a tragedy of hubris and gunpowder that will draw the final line under 100 years of blood. It is July 17th, 1453. The air in the Dordogne Valley is thick with heat and the droning of cicadas. We are near the town of Castillon, on the banks of the Lidoire River. The English commander, John Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, is eating mass, a hurried breakfast of bread and wine, when a messenger bursts into his tent. The man is breathless, his face flushed. He brings news that a cloud of dust has been seen rising from the French camp. The enemy, he claims, is retreating. Talbot, now 66 years old, or perhaps nearly 70, the records are fuzzy, is a man carved from the granite of the past. He is the English Achilles, a living monument to the days of Henry V. He does not send scouts to verify the report. He does not hold a council of war. He acts on instinct, that same aggressive instinct that served him well for 50 years, but is about to betray him. He orders his men to mount up. "May I never hear mass again, if I do not put them to rout," he growls. He rides out on a white cob, wearing a purple velvet cap and a surcoat, but strangely, no armour. He had sworn an oath to the French king upon his previous release from captivity that he would never wear armour against him again. Talbot is a man of his word, even if that word is a death sentence. He leads his force of Anglo-Gascon troops toward the French position, but the French are not retreating. The dust cloud was likely from the camp followers leaving, or perhaps a deliberate ruse. The French army, commanded by the artillery genius Jean Bureau, is waiting inside a fortified encampment. This is not a castle, it is a kill box designed by an engineer. It is surrounded by a ditch and a palisade of stakes, and behind that earthwork sit 300 cannons. They are loaded with stone shot, lead pellets, and scraps of iron. The gunners are standing with their line stocks burning, the slow matches glowing orange in the sunlight. They are watching the English approach, not with fear, but with the cold calculation of technicians. Talbot arrives and sees the truth. The French are dug in. A younger, more flexible commander might have pulled back, waited for his infantry and artillery to catch up, but Talbot is a knight of the old school. He believes that spirit conquers matter, that a bold charge can sweep away any obstacle. He assumes the French are terrified of him personally. He orders the attack. The English infantry and dismounted knights charge across the open meadow, shouting, "Talbot, St. George!" They reach the ditch. They start to hack at the palisades, and then Jean Bureau drops his hand. 300 guns erupt at once. The sound is not like the crack of thunder. It is a physical blow that liquefies the air. The English line simply vanishes. The cannonballs plough through the ranks, tearing through flesh and bone with horrific ease. it is an industrial slaughter. The English waver, stunned by the sheer volume of fire, but Talbot drives them on. "Forward!" he shouts, riding his white horse along the line, a perfect target in his purple velvet. He is urging his men into the mouth of a furnace. For an hour the slaughter continues. The English are unable to cross the ditch. They are merely piling their bodies into it. Then a cannonball strikes Talbot's horse. The animal collapses, trapping the old Earl beneath its weight. He lies there, pinned, helpless, his legs shattered. A French archer named Michel Perounin pushes through the smoke. He sees the famous English commander lying in the dust. There is no request for ransom. There is no chivalrous exchange of speeches. Perounin raises his battle axe and brings it down. The English Achilles is dead. With his death, the spirit of the army breaks. The English flee, pursued by the French cavalry, who cut them down as they run to the river. The river turns red. The Battle of Castillon is over. It is the tombstone of the Middle Ages. Bordeaux surrenders in October. There is no grand treaty signed to end the 100 Years' War. There is no summit of kings. The English simply pack their bags and go home. They retain only Calais, a lonely outpost on the edge of the continent, which they will keep until 1558. But the dream of a continental empire is dead. England returns to its island, exhausted, bankrupt, and bitter. The soldiers returning home find no welcome, only a country slipping into its own civil war, the Wars of the Roses, where they will use the savage lessons learned in France to kill each other. The house of Plantagenet has bled itself dry. France, however, has been forged in the fire. It is no longer a loose collection of feudal duchies. It is a nation. The war has created a sense of Frenchness that did not exist before. It has strengthened the monarchy, created a professional army, and proven the superiority of modern technology. The knight in shining armour is now an anachronism, a romantic figure for storybooks, not a weapon of war. The longbow hangs on the wall, gathering dust, replaced by the arquebus and the cannon. As we look back over the century, from the golden ships at Sluys to the muddy slaughter at Agincourt, from the fires of Rouen to the thunder of Castillon, we see a vast tragic panorama of human ambition. Millions have died. Villages have been burned and rebuilt a dozen times. Fortunes have been made and lost. And for what? The borders are roughly where they were at the start. But the world has changed. The feudal order has shattered. The common people have found their voice, however briefly, and the nations of Europe have begun to take the shapes we recognize today. The 100 Years' War was the crucible of the modern West, a long, painful birth pang of the nation-state. History, in the end, is not just about the winners. It is about the endurance of the human spirit. It is about the archer shivering in the rain, the mother hiding her children in the woods, the peasant girl listening to voices in a garden. It is about the quiet courage to keep living when the sky is falling. The war is over. The cannons are silent. The grass has grown over the graves of Castillon, just as it grew over the graves of Crécy. The kings and the captains have all gone into the dark, leaving us their stories as a warning and a wonder. The long, bloody day is done. The fires of the camps have burned down to glowing embers, winking out one by one, like tired stars falling to earth. The shouting of the captains and the clash of iron have faded into the deep velvet silence of history. The great armies have marched away, leaving the fields to the crickets and the soft, forgiving wind that whispers through the wheat. The armour is rusted, the banners are moth-eaten, and the castles are slowly turning into romantic ruins where moss softens the hard edges of stone. You can let go of the dates now. Let go of the names of kings and the strategies of generals. They are all at rest, sleeping side by side in the quiet earth, their quarrels forgotten in the long peace of eternity. The muddy roads have dried, and wildflowers bloom where the stakes were once driven. Time has done its gentle work, healing the scars of the land. Imagine yourself standing on one of those quiet hills in France, under a vast indigo sky, scattered with the same moon that watched over Joan and Henry. The air is cool and smells of dew and lavender. There is no danger here, only the comfort of the past, a story that has been fully told and put away on the shelf. You are safe, the struggle is finished. The world is turning slowly, rocking you gently in its arms. Close your eyes and let the darkness cover you like a warm, soft cloak. Drift away from the noise of the world into the deep, dreamless sleep of the ages. Sweet dreams.